welcome to Magical Mystery Talk, episode 9. Number 9, you might say. Will that sound like Turn Me On Dead Man, if I reverse it? Number 9. This is Mark Devlin, and just to advise up front, I'm going to be taking a bit of a back seat on this episode. Reason being, firstly, I've got an absolutely colossal workload on at the moment, which is not unusual for me. And secondly, Matt and Desiree have a whole load to talk about this episode. They are, after all, the experts on all things Beatles, conspiratorial and esoteric, and I generally just act as the host. So I'm going to hand over the reins to Matt to discuss all these fascinating matters that they have on the agenda for this time, which include the new book by David Whelan, re-examining the assassination of John Lennon, a new book about Epstein's lawyer, David Jacobs, not the radio DJ, but a different one. Matt's done an interview with the author of that book. A CBE for Stella McCartney. She's also a part of the COP28 Global Climate Warming Change Conference. Why wouldn't she be? There's a new Mel Evans book, lots of books out, discussing his role within the Beatles camp. Of course, the release of Now and Then, the final Beatles record. Or is it? May Pang's new documentary, that's just been released. Bill Gates' daughter allegedly dating Paul McCartney's grandson. Wow, how much more establishment connected can one family be? And Yoko apparently leaving the Dakota, where the assassination of John Lennon happened, of course, after 50 years. So there's a lot there. The best thing I can do is just kick back and listen to Matt and Desiree discuss it and absorb it the same as everyone else out there. So over to Matt and enjoy the show. I'll catch you next time around.
So yeah, thanks Mark. I'm Matt Sergio, co-host of Magical Mystery Talk and proprietor of the site The Occult Beatles. And hello to Desiree Hall, my co-host and the proprietor of the Number 9 blog, a site about the Beatles from a occult conspiratorial angle, of course. And as Mark says, this is episode number 9. 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 Number 9.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Billy. Billy. Billy.
9 seems to be my number, and it's the highest number in the universe. After that, you go back to 1.
Hello. So, yeah, here we go again. It's been a while.
It has been a little while, hasn't it?
I think the last one we did was January 2023, I think, was the last one.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so number 9. It is, as you know, a really important number when it comes to the Beatles, and especially John Lennon.
Absolutely.
I've got a list here of all the number 9s that we can link to, you know, John Lennon and the Beatles.
Yeah, you go ahead, and I'm pulling up stuff as you're talking, and I can kind of jump in with some extra things and whatnot.
Yeah, as I say, I've got a list here, and I don't remember why I wrote this out. This is from about 2 or 3 years ago. It could be that we recorded it on a previous episode. of Magical Mystery Talk? I don't remember. I seem to recall doing this on some podcast. It could have been for the John Lennon special that I recorded with Mark some time back to Mark, what would have been John Lennon's 80th birthday. So this would have been back in 2020. But anyway, apparently, the first person that started to look into this number 9 and noticed that there was all these links was Ray Coleman, the author of a John Lennon biography. Back in the early 80s, I think it was. I think he was the first person that noticed this and wrote about it in his book. And since then, it's just took off and everybody's been adding bits to it. So what I've got here, okay, so John Lennon was born on October 9th. He was born at 6:30 p.m. So that's 6 plus 3 is 9. His mother's address at the time he was born was number 9 Newcastle Road, and Newcastle also has 9 letters. His mother was run over by a car driven by a drunken driver. The car's registration was LKF 630, so that's 6 plus 3, 9. The drunk driver was an off-duty policeman. His badge number was 126. 1 plus 2 plus 6 is 9. Brian Epstein, Beatles manager, first introduced himself to the Beatles at the Cavern in 1961 on November 9th. And the Beatles officially split up 9 years later in 1970. They actually split up in 1969, kinda. That's when John Lennon said to the rest of the Beatles, "That's it, I'm out of here." But they actually carried on recording together, and the announcement wasn't made till 1970. But yeah, anyway, Epstein died in 1967 on August 27th. So that's 2 plus 7 is 9. The Beatles received their record contract from EMI in 1962 on May 9th. And they produced many of their hits at EMI's studios at Abbey Road. Abbey Road, if you add all those letters together, that's 9 letters. The Beatles made their first appearance in America, the all-important America, which was vital if they wanted to take over the world. Their first appearance in America was on February 9th, 1964, and that was on the Ed Sullivan TV show. When John first met his future wife, his first wife, Cynthia, she was living at 18 Trinity Road. So that's 1 plus 8 is 9. Their son, Julian, was born at a hospital in Liverpool with the address 126 Smithdown Road. So that's 1 plus 2 plus 6 is 9. Smithdown is 9 letters. And of course, there's the song Number 9 Dream by John Lennon. And John knew about the whole Number 9 thing. He was aware of this and he talked about it in 1 or 2 or maybe even more interviews, but I'm aware of at least 1 or 2 that he talked about the 9 thing, how it seemed to be attached to him. So yeah, he wrote a song and released a song called Number 9 Dream, a solo song. And that got to number 9 in the US charts. And there were also Beatles songs with the number 9 in them. There was One After 909. There was Revolution number 9, of course, number 9, from where that comes from. And then there's his name. He changed his name from John Winston Lennon to John Ono Lennon. And yeah, so
9.
Yeah.
9 O's.
9 O's, yeah. And he was shot on December 8th, but in Britain, with the time difference, it was December 9th. And also,
he was shot in front of the Dakota, which was on West 72nd Street, which is also a 9. And their apartment number was 72, also a 9.
And when he was, and it keeps going, when he was in the solo years, post-split albums, he recorded he released a total of 8 albums. But at the time he died, he was working on a new album, which was yet to be released, and it was released posthumously. So that makes 9 albums that he actually worked on while he he was alive. So even though one of them was released after he died, and that was the Milk and Honey album that came out. And he was born in Liverpool, which is that 9 letters? Liverpool.
Yep.
Yeah, 9 letters. And he was pronounced dead at the Roosevelt Hospital, which Roosevelt is 9 letters as well.
Right.
There's actually more, but these are the ones that I thought would be the most striking. I went for the really striking landmark ones, but as I say, there's so many more. But anyway, have you got any more? I mean, there's loads there.
The number 9 and the association with the Beatles was my inspiration for naming my blog the Number 9 blog, just because there are so many 9s involved with the Beatles, and in particular John Lennon. I think you did hit all of the major ones. The only thing I have is when he wrote the song, the Beatles wrote the song One After 909. They wrote that at 9 Newcastle Road in Raventree, Liverpool, and all of those have 9 letters. So Newcastle, Wavertree, and Liverpool all have 9 letters, and they wrote One After 909 there. So, but I think you covered all the good ones.
And
absolutely.
Do you remember when that there was? I don't know if they released it in America. I think they did. It was in 2009. The Beatles, or what was left of the Beatles by that point, they re-released all their albums, all the studio albums.
Right.
They remixed them,
remastered
them for the digital market. They put them all out on CD again, and they released it on the 9th of the 9th month, 2009. And I remember the promo for it, the advertising. I don't know if it was a poster or whether I saw it online, like an online advert, but I seem to remember that it was Abbey Road Studios. It was a picture of Abbey Road Studios and these big numbers with the date on it, and it was 09.09.09. So they know about this thing. John definitely knew about it because he talked about it and he wrote a song about it, released Number 9 Dream. But since he's passed away, it's carried on. The Beatles camp have carried it on. They've continued it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you look at that 999, I suppose that advert, if you flip it over, then you've got 666, but that takes us off into...
Yeah.
That takes us off into another completely different thing, I suppose. Okay, well, there's so much to talk about. It's really, when up until October, November 2023, there wasn't that much going on in the sort of the Beatles world, as it were. That there was a couple of events that took place that I'd like to touch on and talk about. But there wasn't that much going on. And then suddenly in October, November, it's like, bang, all these things started happening, new books coming out, announcements being made. And probably the biggest of them all, well, not probably, definitely the biggest event of all of it, and for the whole year, is the release of this so-called last Beatles song ever. I'll believe that when I see it. And that's the Now and Then song, which was assisted with AI, of course. And it's been a long road to get to this stage with this song. For anyone who has been living under a rock in the last couple of months, basically Now and Then is it's been billed as the last ever Beatles song. And basically what it is, what they've done is back in the 90s, George, Paul and Ringo provided backing instrumentation to a John Lennon demo, and which John had recorded on a piano at the Dakota back in the late 70s. George, Paul and Ringo were recording some instrumentation for this over this demo tape back in the 90s, but then they just left it.
It wasn't good enough quality or something, right?
Yeah. But in more recent times, in 2023, Paul went back to it with Ringo, and they worked on it again, and that became a single, which was released in November. But yeah, it was originally a demo back in the 70s. I think, depending what version of events you believe, it was either recorded by John in 1977 or 1978 or 79, sometime around then. And basically, it's just John playing on a piano with in his apartment. The TV is on in the background. He's got a boom box, what they call a boom box, or a ghetto blaster, on top of the piano, and he's just going through this song. And there's, it's just a demo. He never intended for it to be released in the form that he was recording it. It's just him playing around, playing it as it's coming to him, because there's like missing parts of it while he's playing it. There's parts of it where he mumbles some of the lyrics because he hasn't quite got to the point where he's got all the lyrics worked out. So yeah, and then fast forward to 1994, I think it was. So the story goes, Yoko Ono saw Paul McCartney at an awards ceremony, I think it was, and she handed him a cassette, and she said to him, "Here, Paul, see what you can do with these." And it was a demo cassette, like a compilation of various demos that John had been working on at around the same time in the sort of late 70s. And it was Now and Then was on there. Also Free as a Bird, Real Love, and I think Grow Old With Me was on there as well. And Grow Old With Me had actually come out before. It had come out on the Milk and Honey album, as the demo, actually in its demo form, just John on a piano, quite rough sounding. But and I think Real Love had actually come out in demo form as well. I think it was on a John Lennon compilation album, which came out at the end of the 80s as part of a soundtrack for a John Lennon documentary.
Right.
But yeah, so basically what Paul did, he took it into the studio, this demo with this cassette with all these demo songs on it, and he and George and Ringo added instrumentation to Free as a Bird and Real Love. And in the case of Free as a Bird, they also added some extra verses to it, some extra lead vocals to it, and some backing vocals, of course. And Ringo played drums, they played guitars and all of that. And yeah, so basically it's just John's voice with George, Ringo and Paul playing over the top of it. And they were Free as a Bird and Real Love were released as singles in the 90s, in 1995 and 96. And then when it got to Now and Then, as I said earlier, they began to work on it. So I think George laid down some guitars for it, some lead guitar or some acoustic, I think. Paul added some instrumentation as well, and Ringo added some drums. And then they kind of just left it. It got put to one side, and that was that. They just moved on with their lives and left it. And yeah, so fast forward to 2021, and we get the release of the Get Back documentary series, which was produced and directed by Peter Jackson. So Peter Jackson has said, when he was putting together this documentary, which is basically a fly on the wall documentary, it originally came out in 1970. It was released in 1970 as a 90-minute cinema film, I think it was. Basically, it was a fly on the wall documentary of the Beatles in the studio during January 1969, recording then new songs for a new album, of course. So this was a real fly on the wall documentary, as I say. And yeah, tens and tens and tens and tens of hours of footage was filmed and recorded, audio as well. But out of all of that, only about 90 minutes of it was released originally in 1970 when it came out in the cinemas, when it came out in movie theaters. But when Peter Jackson got his hands on that footage in 2020, I think it was 2019, 2020, and which was finally released in 2021, he managed to release over 3 episodes on the Disney Plus channel in 2021 I think it was a 3-episode miniseries, and there was just over 2 hours per episode that he managed to get out into the public. But even then, there's still tens and tens and tens of hours of footage which we still haven't seen or heard. Now, he says whilst he was looking at all this footage and listening to it, there were certain parts in the documentary where say, for example, the Beatles were in the studio and they were rehearsing a song, and they would stop and maybe have a cup of tea, have a cigarette, just chill out a little bit. They're still sitting in the studio, but they're just having a little bit of an informal chat and a cup of tea in between songs, in between takes. And the way that Peter Jackson has said it in interviews and stuff, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here. Basically, what he said is, say, for example, they stopped in the middle of a song and they're having a bit of a chat and a cup of tea. Say, for example, George is having a conversation. Peter was looking at this footage and looking at George, say, for example, having a conversation with one or more members of the band in between a song. And it looked as though what George was saying was really interesting, but he couldn't quite pick up what George was saying, because whilst he was talking, he'd be picking at his guitar. He'd be plucking away at the electric guitar, and the electric guitar was louder than what he was actually saying, what George was saying to maybe John or Paul or whoever he was talking to. And at the same time, in the background, you might have had Ringo tapping away at the drums slightly, or somebody else in the background is plonking away at a piano, or is making some, banging noises or moving some equipment or something, or maybe there's another conversation going on. So you couldn't actually hear what George was saying. And this was really annoying Peter Jackson. And I don't know how it happened, but at around this time that Peter Jackson was observing this during the editing phases of putting this documentary together, he came up with this new invention. He and some people he worked with came up with this new AI software, and which they nicknamed Mal. And the reason they nicknamed it Mal was partly in tribute to Mal Evans, who was, of course, one of the members of the Beatles' trusted inner circle. He was their roadie. He met them and started becoming their roadie when they were still in their pre-fame years at the Cavern in Liverpool, and he stayed with them through the touring years when they were famous as their roadie then. And then when they stopped touring in 1966, he became kind of like, I don't know. I'm going to say gopher, but that's a little bit not quite. Yeah. I mean, a slightly disrespectful, because he was more than that. But he was the kind of, he was the kind of guy that if the Beatles were in the studio at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and they wanted drugs, he would go out and find drugs for them. Or say, for example, Ringo broke a drumstick at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mal would be able to leave EMI Studios at Abbey Road at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning and come back within half an hour with drumsticks. And God knows where he would have found them from, but he had this talent for doing that kind of thing. But yeah, he was more than that. He produced songs by artists on the Apple label, the Beatles Apple label as well. He wrote songs for bands as well. I think he wrote a song on one of Ringo's solo albums. I think he co-wrote a song with George Harrison on the Ringo album from 1973. So he was more than just a gopher. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, Peter Jackson, this AI software, he nicknamed it MAL, and what it stands for is Machine Audio Learning. And basically, and I think I'm right about this, basically what this AI technology does, and I think it is important to mention this because this is actually the technology they used on Now and Then, this so-called AI song, which was released in November of 2023. Basically what this, I've heard him talk about it, and I think if I'm not getting it wrong, I think what he said was, what Peter Jackson said was, what this AI software does is you feed it sound and it recognizes the sound. So it's almost human-like. If you feed it a guitar, if you feed the sound of a guitar into it, it knows at that point that is a guitar. Anyway, so to get around this problem of trying to get, as I said before, there was Peter Jackson trying to, let's say, for example, he's got George in a conversation in the studio in 1969, but he can't hear him because there's all this instrumentation going on. What this MAL can do, this MAL software can do, it can identify every single sound that's going on in the studio whilst George is talking. So it identifies George talking. It identifies the guitar that he's plucking, which is so loud that you can't hear George's voice. It identifies all the background noise that's going on. Maybe, Ringo, say, for example, as I say, maybe tapping away at the drums, the plonking of the piano, the background noise, people moving stuff, having chats in the background. This MAL software identifies every single piece of sound. And then what it does is it takes each sound and places it in
isolates it
all. Yeah, exactly. It isolates it all. And then at that point, you can turn the volume up on George's voice, and maybe turn the volume down on the guitar he's plucking away at, or whatever. But you can turn George's voice up and then put it all back together again. And then you can hear George's voice. So this is what this MAL software can do. And they used it again in 2022 when the Beatles re-released the Revolver album, their 1966 album Revolver. When they re-released that in 2022 in box set form, there was a remix version of it. And what Giles Martin did, Giles Martin being, of course, the son of Beatles producer George Martin, Giles Martin has basically carried on the mantle and is working on Beatles projects now. He used that MAL software to take each song from the Revolver album, and he did exactly what Peter Jackson did in that film. As you say, he isolated everything. He took every song and isolated every piece of instrumentation and vocal and everything that was on each song, isolated it all. And then he started to, for example, on the song Taxman on the Revolver album, the new MAL remix version, if you listen to the song Taxman, if you're familiar with that song, the first thing you'll notice is, oh my God, the bass. You can hear Paul's bass. I mean, really clearly, not only louder, but clearly. And that's what he's been able to do thanks to this MAL software. Of course, these days you can have as, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not an expert in this kind of thing, but these days you can have as many tracks as you want to. The sky is the limit. So if you want to record your vocals, you can have that on one track. You can have 3-part harmonies. You can have one part of the harmony on one track, the second on another, the third on another. If you want piano, you can have that on a separate track. You can have drums on a separate track, and on you go. You can have as many instruments as you want, and they all have different faders, different tracks, different channels. They don't have to share, with other sounds. But back in the 60s with the Revolver album, they only had 4 tracks. So back in those days, if they had more than 4 pieces of instrumentation or sound that they wanted to record, if there was more than 4 ingredients in a song, that meant they had to share one track and put 2 or 3 different ingredients on that one track. And the problem with that is, back in the day with Revolver, they only had 4 tracks. So if you put a lead vocal and drums on the same track, being recorded through one fader, that meant they were glued together. Those 2 sounds were glued together, and there was no way up until this MAL software came out that you could unglue the drums from the vocals. So they were stuck forever. But what this MAL can do is it can pick up those 2 sounds on that one track and separate them. So that's how this technology works. This is how this MAL technology works. And in 2023, so they used this for the Revolver album. And in 2023, when it came to Now and Then, that's what they did with Now and Then. Because apparently, and you can actually hear Now and Then, it did actually come out as a demo, in demo form, on bootleg albums in the 90s.
Right.
The actual original demo. And as I said earlier, when John recorded that demo, he did it in his apartment. He had a boombox on top. And I mean, he had a boombox on top. It was really, really basic, As I say, he wasn't intending to release that demo as a he wasn't intending to, when he was recording it on that day back in the 70s, he wasn't intending for that to come out in public. And this wasn't a demo. It wasn't even a professionally recorded demo. It wasn't done in a recording studio. It was just at home with a ghetto blaster, just a home tape machine sitting on top of a piano. The TV's on in the background. And apparently there's a hum on it as well. And there's cracking sound on the cassette, on the sound, because the mains lead on the back of the boom box wasn't plugged in right. And so there's all this kind of like weird, crackling, humming earth, kind of like an earth hum sound coming through as well. So, yeah. So, I mean, if you hear Free as a Bird and Real Love, which were recorded on cassette as well, if you listen to those songs, the instrumentation that George, Paul and Ringo have recorded is great. It sounds like it was recorded in the 90s in a recording studio. It sounds clear. It sounds pristine. Great. But when you listen to John's voice on Free as a Bird and Real Love, it sounds tinny. You can tell that it's been taken off a cassette, can't you? It just sounds really distant. It doesn't sound right,
Almost ghostly.
Almost ghostly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And back in the 90s, even the most sophisticated equipment that there was available back in the 90s was still not good enough to be able to get rid of that problem. But now, now here we are in 2023, and earlier in 2023, Paul and Ringo returned to Now and Then, which they'd put aside in the 90s when they first worked on it with George, when he was still with us. And they used this MAL software. Basically, they fed this demo, this crappy sounding demo with the background noise and all of that. They fed it through to MAL and separated all the crap sounds, the background noise, isolated John's voice on its own, cleaned it up. And then they added George's guitar from the original sessions when they worked on it in the 90s. And then Ringo put some fresh drums on it. They put backing vocals on it. I think Paul and Ringo put some backing vocals on it. Got Paul's bass on there, and there's orchestration as well, courtesy of Giles Martin as well. And then I think it was in June of 2023, Paul announced that there was this new Beatles song coming out. That's when all of this started to come into the public domain. He didn't actually say it was going to be Now and Then, though. But I don't know about you, Desiree, but I'm a Beatles nut. I'm a Beatles freak. And I knew instantly when he was announcing that there was this quote unquote new Beatles song, even though he didn't say what that song was. I knew straight away, or pretty much guessed 99.9% that it was going to be Now and Then, because I think most down and dirty Beatles fans, Beatles freaks, they knew about Now and Then. It had been talked about in interviews by Paul and in the past over the decades, and of course,
it had been released on like bootlegs and stuff too.
Yeah, so exactly. The rough demo version was out on bootlegs and stuff. But so this is what he said to the BBC, and this kicked off a stink. This kicked off an AI controversy. He said to the BBC in June, he said, Peter Jackson, was able to extricate John's voice from a ropey little bit of cassette. We had John's voice and a piano, and he could separate them with AI. They tell the machine, that's the voice, this is a guitar, lose the guitar. So when we came to make it, it was a demo that John had, and we were able to take John's voice and get it pure through this AI. Then we can mix the record as you would normally do. So it gives you some sort of leeway. So there's a good side to it and then a scary side. And we'll just have to see where that leads. I mean, I don't know about you, but certainly after that announcement came out, I noticed there was a couple of friends who sent me emails, and I noticed on some Beatles blogs as well, and also in the mainstream media, and to some extent in the alternative community, in the alternative media, there was a bit of a controversy, a bit of a panic. It was like, oh my God, AI, there was this idea that there was suggestions that perhaps the track had been faked somehow with AI, that maybe Paul and Ringo, what they'd done was to fake John's voice to create a fake song, a computer generated fake song with an AI quote unquote fake John.
Right.
And of course, this all feeds
And
into
George too.
yeah, and it all feeds into all that, you know, the dangers of artificial intelligence. And he didn't do himself any favors. What I just quoted to you, that announcement he made, he didn't do himself any favors by saying there's a good side to it and then a scary side. But yeah, and I think he must have realized, or maybe some of his closest aides realized, that there was a bit of a controversy, because some days after that, he went back onto social media to kind of quell the controversy.
Right.
He went on Twitter and he said, "Been great to see such an exciting response to our forthcoming Beatles project. No one is more excited than us to be sharing something with you later in the year. We've seen some confusion and speculation about it. Seems to be a lot of guesswork going on out there. Can't say too much at this stage, but to be clear, nothing has been artificially or synthetically created. It's all real and we all play on it. We cleaned up some existing recordings, a process which has gone on for years. We hope you love it as much as we do." And Sean Lennon, John and Yoko's son, got in on the act as well to try and quell the controversy. He went onto Twitter and said, "All we did was clean the noise from the vocal track. People are completely misunderstanding what occurred. There have always been ways of denoising tracks, but AI just does it better because it learns what the vocal is and is able to very precisely remove everything that is not the vocal." So yeah, that's what he said. When you heard Now and Then, did you notice samples of old Beatles songs in the background?
Yeah, not it was the first time hearing it. The new one, of course. There was it seemed like there was just something off about it. I couldn't really put my finger on it, you know, but there was just something that didn't sit right when I first heard it. And I don't know I still don't know exactly what that was, but yeah, there was like some extra stuff in there, it seemed like, or something. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, what Giles Martin has done, he's taken samples from old Beatles songs, like backing vocals, the Beatles doing harmonies, and added it into the song.
There. Yeah.
So it's not only has it been cleaned up, the sound has been cleaned up with AI, but Giles Martin has added samples in it. If you listen to it, apparently what he says, if you listen carefully, you can hear backing vocals, harmonies from the songs Here, There and Everywhere, Eleanor Rigby, and also Because, which is from the Abbey Road album, which was essentially an a cappella song when it first came out in 1969. But yeah, I mean, I've spotted Because. I can hear that in the background, that song, but I don't think I've spotted Here, There and Everywhere and Eleanor Rigby. But yeah, so not only has it been AI'd, but they've put samples in it as well, pretended that there's Beatles backing. Well, it's not pretending, it is Beatles backing vocals, but they're not. They're from 60 odd years ago. You mentioned earlier when I was talking about how back in the 90s they'd originally worked on this Now and Then and put it aside. You said that, I remember you saying that the reason they did that was because they weren't happy with the quality.
Right.
I was just wondering, what do you mean by quality?
Well, just as you had said earlier, it was like a cassette tape in a regular recording boombox, nothing fancy, something that anybody could get at the store, not done at the recording studio. And it was just very poor quality, really hard to hear what he was saying. The tape itself was really old, you know, and packed away, I think, in like John and Yoko's basement or closet or something for years and years. And just a really poor quality. And if that boombox too was on top of the piano and he's playing the piano, there's going to be vibrations. I'm sure there was all kinds of background noise in there that wasn't usable or wasn't able to hear John as well as they would like, I'm sure.
Yeah, because I seem to remember back a few years ago because it's been discussed with Beatle anoraks, train spotters, if you like, sad Beatles fans that, you know, follow all this stuff.
Right.
It's been discussed for years now that there was Now and Then, that this song Now and Then existed. And I seem to remember back a few years ago on chat forums or wherever I saw or heard or read about this, that the reason they didn't release it was because George Harrison hated it. And the quote I remember was, pardon my French, he thought it was fucking crap. That's the actual quote. And
sounds like something he would say.
It does, doesn't it? And yeah, apparently Paul McCartney, in an interview that I only saw a few weeks ago, it was an interview that he did for Jeff Lynne. There was a BBC documentary that came out about 10 or so years ago, and it was a documentary in tribute to Jeff Lynne, who of course is from ELO, and he's the guy that actually produced Free as a Bird and Real Love, worked on those tracks that George and Ringo and Paul had worked on back in the 90s and were released, and he was also at the sessions for those for the recording originally of Now and Then with George, Ringo and Paul back in the 90s when they were working on Now and Then back then, and then put it to one side. I haven't seen the whole documentary, but I've seen the bit where Paul's talking about, he actually talks about Now and Then in it. And he actually says, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, yeah, we were working on this other song, as well as Free as a Bird and Real Love. There was another song and it was called Now and Then. But we put it to one side because George said it was fucking rubbish. But there seems to be some backtracking on that now, because now when you look at what the Beatles camp are saying, they're saying, oh, no, George liked it. It's not, he didn't think the song was fucking crap. He thought the sound quality was crap. So, you know, I've got this feeling that they're backtracking, and they've put statements out. George's wife, his widow, Olivia's made a video to try and put her case across, and there's a quote from her on the Beatles official website, where they're kind of trying to explain that no, he liked the song, honestly. If he was alive now, he would have been, you know, he would have been supportive of this. And I don't know, the cynic in me the cynic in me thinks that he didn't like the song, and because it's like it's almost dishonorable. It's like they're going against his, you know, they're dishonoring his memory basically by releasing this song. They've gone in and worked on it anyway, irrespective of what George would have thought. And it's like it's kind of in bad taste for someone who passed away and didn't want it to come out, but here they are cashing in on it, kind of thing. Anyway. So on the Beatles official website, go for it.
I was just saying, I kind of feel the same. I mean, I am a Beatles fan, and you know, that song, it's really not that great in my humble opinion. And I'm not a musician, and I'm not, you know, it's really not a good song, you know, and it's definitely Beatlesque, and I can hear, you know, that's definitely John Lennon, and that was his style back then, you know, what he was trying to do. But, you know, it's just the way they hyped it up and everything, you know, I thought it was going to be this great song, and it's just kind of like, yeah, all right, you know, it's for a final Beatles song, it's just kind of you know,
I don't think it's going to be the final Beatles song. I think they're going to start doing stuff. I was listening to a podcast the other week. It was a mainstream podcast, a mainstream Beatles podcast. I think it's called Things We Said Today. And a couple of the guys that were talking on there said they were invited to Apple, to a hotel in New York, I think it was, where Apple premiered the song a day before it was released, or a week before it was released. And they were told in no uncertain terms when they were there, it was announced that there's more to come. So yeah, I don't know what that means, whether that means they're going to start messing around with other songs from George and John who have passed away and start, you know, I don't know what that means, but So do you think it's actually John on that singing on there? Because there are some people on alternative chat forums that think that might not be John that's on Now and Then.
Yeah.
Mm.
Or it's so digitally or so computerized in a way that it's almost like the Free as a Bird. But even more so, it's a kind of a ghostly sound. It's not as robust as how I remember John Lennon's.
Because his voice sounds high, sort of high,
Yeah.
not high pitched, not like squeaky, but very high in the range.
Right.
Like it's somebody else. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It's eerie. It's an eerie kind of a sound. It's kind of like, oh, is that? Yeah, I don't know. Like I said before, the first time I heard it, there was just something off about it that it didn't sit well with me in a way. It was just kind of like, oh, I don't know that I like this song. It's just kind of, I don't know, didn't do it for me, I guess.
I've got to admit, I like it.
You do?
I do. And the thing is, when I heard the demo years ago, I hated it. And when I found out that, when I started to guess, when it was announced in June that when Paul said that there was going to be this new Beatles song, quote unquote, and I instantly thought, yeah, that's Now and Then. My next thought was, oh no, I hate that song. That's awful. But I don't know. I just like what they've done to it, and I liked it straight away.
Yeah.
I heard it once, and that was enough, and it's still in my head now. And that came out in November. We're recording this in December, and it's in my head almost every single day. I can't get it out of my head. It's like earworm. That just won't go.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
That's really, kind of scary too.
That is kind of scary. Yeah. So, yeah, with this backtracking, Olivia on the Beatles official website, she states that no, George would have loved this song. No, it's not the song he hates. She says, back in 1995, after several days in the studio working on the track, George felt the technical issues with the demo were insurmountable and concluded that it was not possible to finish the track to a high enough standard. If he were here today, Danny, that's their son, and I know he would have wholeheartedly joined Paul and Ringo in completing the recording of Now and Then. And then there was this video that she put up on social media where she says, we were in this store and George saw this clock made out of bits and pieces, and it had some Scrabble letters, and it just said Now and Then. He was attracted to it for some reason. He just took it off the wall and bought it, and he put it in his garden, and the clock stayed in the garden in this little area. It sat there for 25 years, she says. Anyway, she then goes on, roll on to the summer of 2022, and she says, the phone rings. It's Paul McCartney, and he begins to explain, reminding me of this third song that was on the cassette tape with Real Love and Free as a Bird. I said, oh, I remember it. It's called Now and Then. And I'm standing there looking at the clock. We were so moved and happy that this thing that George had held in his hand somehow magically appeared. And I said, I think this is Georgie saying it's okay. Don't know what you make of that.
That's pretty eerie.
Yeah. And the clock is on the if you buy the CD single or the vinyl cover, it's on there. The clock is on there. So,
picture of it, with lots of interesting little tidbits.
Yeah, it's
numbers
weird.
And dice and
what you make of it
at the top.
Yeah,
I looked at it and I looked at the numbers and that were on there, and I couldn't really make heads or tails of it as far as like being an occult kind of a thing. I think that the whole story behind it that Olivia presented gives it enough of a Beatles coincidence, all on its own. But yeah, just it's very strange, and just the fact that George happened upon that and bought it, like that story could be embellished a little bit, I think. Possibly, but I don't know. The dice on there with the 5 instead of 4. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I've looked at it and tried to see if there's any like occult clues on there. Basically, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I mean, if you just anyone who's listening to this, if they just type in Now and Then Beatles, I'm sure it'll come up on a image search. If you type in CD cover or something like that, Now and Then, it's basically a clock. It's rectangular size but standing up, so it's a rectangle standing up, and at the bottom of it there's like a ruler, like a bit of a ruler that's been cut off, and that's kind of stuck at the bottom, a wooden ruler. Then above that there's a picture of the Beatles from 1963. That's obviously been added to after they bought it. I don't think the coincidence would have gone that far. I don't think George would have walked in the shop and seen that. I don't think the coincidence, the magic and all of that, this synchronicity would have been that strong.
Didn't Olivia say that picture was on it, and that's why he
does
bought
she?
it?
I don't know.
I thought that's what it said in the statement.
Did it? Oh, well, maybe I missed it when I was reading it. I wasn't paying attention.
I could be mistaken.
Let me just look. Just looking at my bits of paper here where I've got it. No, she doesn't mention the picture. No, she mentions Scrabble letters, and it's a clock. But I don't know if they are Scrabble letters. Because above that picture of the Beatles, you've got then written. You've got 4 different square chips, with T on one chip, H on another, E on another, and N on another. But Scrabble, I always thought Scrabble letters were a white background and black letters, but these are white letters with a black background. Do you get Scrabble letters like that?
I've never seen them like that. And usually the Scrabble letters will have numbers next to the letter for a point value.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Maybe she was mistaken, or who knows.
Yeah. That's a bit odd. And then above that you've got a domino, or when I first saw it I thought it was a dice, 2 dice stuck together, but we were swapping emails, Desiree, and you said no, that's a domino. I went, oh god, yeah. Oh god, how stupid. So you've got then, and this is where I think there might be a Paul is dead clue. Okay, go with me on this. I might be stretching it, but it says, okay, so you've got the so-called Scrabble letters that say then, and then above that you've got 2 pairs of Scrabble numbers. You've got a domino. You've got a domino, and so you've got 2 sets of domino numbers. And the bottom set next to the word then is a 2. And then if you look on the top part, it's 3 dots. So you've got then the word, and then above that a domino with 2 dots, so 2, and then above that you've got 3 dots, so 3. So, and then above the 3, the domino where it says 3, above that you've got in Scrabble letters letters spelling out the word now. Okay, now go with me on this. I might be stretching it, but if you look, then, okay, so then, and then above it you've got 2 dots. So that means back then, when they first worked on the song, there were 2 dead. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or no, 2 alive.
Right.
George and Ringo. Okay. And now, where it says 3, now there's only 1 alive, Ringo, because George, John, and Paul are dead.
Right.
Right? Does that make sense? If
Could
we're going
be.
down that PID road.
If you're going that way.
Yeah. And that's pretty much as far as I've got with that. I mean, as you say, on the top, there's a key. Right at the top of the clock, above the clock, there's like a roof, which looks like a triangle. So it could be a pyramid. It could be a pyramid. And in the middle of that triangle, there's a key. That could be Masonic. It could be a Masonic key to the mysteries, but I'm really stretching it now. But yeah. So
not necessarily. It's the key to the symbolism or something. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. The key to everything.
Yeah. That's as far as I've got.
Also, the dominoes in total equal 5, right? 2 and the 3. So there's the 4 Beatles plus the one. You could look at it that way too. Who knows?
Yeah.
Plus
And it
the extra Paul McCartney.
Yeah, exactly. And the time says 1350 or 150, 10 to 2. So I don't know. Yeah, on the clock.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another thing that you picked up on, that you yourself picked up on, was the day that it was released, that the actual song was released to be bought. That you on the day it actually came out for anyone to buy it. It was
November the 2nd.
November the 2nd. It was announced to the world on November 1st. Not announced. It was premiered. The song was premiered on November 1st, and it was available to buy on November 2nd, which was a Friday. Now, I don't know about in the States, but in the UK, a Friday is not an unusual day to release a new song, a new single or album. In fact, most singles and albums are released on Fridays because the UK singles and albums chart comes out on a Friday. So basically, if you release your album or single on a Friday, that gives you 7 full days to sell enough to get it into the next week's chart. But as you pointed out, November the 1st and especially November 2nd is a very important day in the Mexican calendar to people in Mexico and people living outside of Mexico, because it's November 2nd is Dia de los Muertos. In other words, the Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead. Yeah. Yeah. It's huge in Mexico. And me being in San Diego, I'm pretty much a border town here to Mexico. And it's pretty big here as well. And so as soon as I saw, and it's big for me too, in the flower business as well.
Because you sell flowers.
Everybody buys flowers for their loved ones who have passed. So yeah, it stood out to me right away that it was Day of the Dead, but I just figured that they would release it more on a significant date, but that might be very significant, especially I believe that Olivia is Hispanic, is Mexican, right?
She's Mexican.
So, yeah.
Olivia Arias. That was how she was born, Olivia Arias.
Right. So interesting that
born in America, but to a Mexican family. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Knows? I don't know how right or wrong I am, but November the 1st is part of that Day of the Dead holiday. So it's a celebration in a way. November the 1st honors the deceased children, and November 2nd is deceased adults. So you could say John and George and Paul if you want to go down that road. But yeah, very important day apparently on that day. From the little research I've done into it, you build little altars in your home, or you can put them out in public, little altars with mementos of your loved ones or friends you knew, little mementos that they had themselves, they owned themselves, or little mementos representing things that they liked. And you go visit grave sites on those days, and there's street festivals and special foods they make. And as you say, flowers and lots of flowers being bought and displayed. And when I look at that clock, that now and then clock, and anyone who hasn't seen it, go take a look and see what you think. It does look a bit like an altar.
It does, yeah, it does in a way. Because definitely some kind of an homage.
Yeah, because it's got the picture of the Beatles on the bottom of it as well.
Right.
Do you want to?
And thinking about it again, since we discussed that picture being added, it's kind of strange too that they would have chosen that picture if it wasn't already there. I guess being the then part of it, but there's so many pictures of the Beatles, and why they chose that particular one is kind of interesting as well. Yeah. So I don't know. I'll have to think about that some more.
Mock top Beatles. Yeah. Direct that is their Beatlemania image. That's the collarless jackets with the mop top hair. That's definitely a 1963 picture, a very early picture of early Fame years picture.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think about I Am a Phony getting in on this? Of course, I Am a Phony, aka Rotten Apple, this YouTube channel that is very PID heavy, that's been putting up occult PID quote unquote clues since the 2000s. I Am a Phony got in on the act because it had the actual full version of Now and Then, because the version that we hear, the official version, is actually a chopped down version, because the original version has got an extra verse in it. And that was taken out of the official version. There's a part in it where John sings, "I don't want to lose you, no, no." And then he goes off. There's some more lyrics to that. It goes on for about another minute or two. But they chopped that out of the official Beatles version. But I spotted in October of 2023, so a good month before the official version came out, I Am a Phony had on their YouTube channel the full version, the full Now and Then song, but it was called "I Don't Want to Lose You." It was titled, it was listed as "I Don't Want to Lose You" on there. And I think we might have talked about this before. I'm not sure. I've certainly talked about it in previous podcasts elsewhere. I'm not sure if we talked about this on Magical Mystery Talk, and this is thanks to Redwell Trabant of the site Beatles Conspiracy. I think it was Redwell Trabant who discovered some business records from back in the day that links I Am a Phony, aka Rotten Apple, to Neil Aspinall, who was another Beatles insider. I mean, he was such an insider to the extent that, I mean, you want to talk about insider, you know, he went to school with George and Paul. He was one of their first road managers in the pre-Fame years. He stayed with them and was their roadie in the Beatlemania years, through the touring years. And then after they stopped touring, he eventually went on to run their business, Apple. And he was like their CEO. He was like their top man at Apple. And basically in the post-split years, if he was like their gatekeeper. If you wanted, if you were somebody, a journalist or a filmmaker or a director or producer or whatever, and you wanted to speak to the Beatles as an entity about a project, you had to get through you had to get through Neil in order to make that happen. He was the gatekeeper up until he passed away in the 2000s. So yeah, his name has been linked to I Am a Phony. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because if you listen, well, first off, how is it that I mean, I only spotted it in October. It might have been there before, but how is it that I Am a Phony, aka Rotten Apple, managed to have this song up on YouTube and it didn't get taken down?
As is all of their, they use, he or the entity, I Am a Phony, uses Beatles songs all the time. Yeah. And anybody who uses anything Beatles on YouTube gets taken down almost immediately. And they have been playing for years and years and years and years without any cancellation, if you will. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, very, very interesting.
You know, even irrespective of the Beatles, I mean, if I've tried uploading videos in the past where and it won't allow me to release the video that I want to release that I've uploaded, because apparently there's a copyright infringement. And I'm thinking, where's the copyright infringement? I don't remember any. And I eventually find it, and it's like something that's like 4 seconds long or 10 seconds long, and it's like a little piece of film footage or a little song playing in the background. You can hardly hear it, you know, but you can. It's so distant in the background. It's faint. But YouTube picks up on it and won't allow me to put the video up. And so how does this I Am a Phony get past all this? And if you've listened to this I Don't Want to Lose You, like I said before, before Now and Then was officially released, the only version of Now and Then that you could find online was the demo. And and the demo sounds crackly. It sounds crap. It sounds like a cassette. But if you listen to I Don't Want to Lose You, to me it sounds crystal clear. It sounds like it's been in a studio and it's been cleaned up. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. It was crystal clear when I heard it in October or whenever it was released. Yeah, that was interesting. And the he always has a video with it, you know. Or they always have a video with it, however you want to say it. But and using all of that, the AI technology was pretty interesting in the video as well. And so I think that kind of, at least in our little Beatles controversial world that we belong to, that raised a lot of eyebrows as well, as far as the AI was concerned with the song. And then it being so similar to the actual release that the Beatles did a month later, that was pretty eyebrow raising.
I forgot to mention that it's not the demo. It's not just John on a piano. It's actually got instrumentation on the top of it. It's got drums. It's got backing vocals, guitars. Maybe I can't remember now, but it sounds like it was done in a studio, like a top-notch, state-of-the-art studio. It sounds almost like it does. It sounds almost like the version that came out officially.
That they released. Yeah, very, very similar. Very similar. But like you said, it had that extra little bridge, or that, the extra little verse in there. And I think that the part that they left out of the original Beatles, or the official Beatles version, he said, "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to abuse you." And I think that that's why they took it out.
Yeah.
But that was left in the I Am a Phony version.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, that is weird. Also released on the same day as Now and Then was the repackaged and remixed compilations, the Beatles 1962 to 1966, the two double albums that originally came out in 1973, one of which was the Beatles 1962 to 1966, and the other one was the Beatles 1967 to 1970. I mean, they're the albums that got me into the Beatles. When those albums came out, I was 3-4 years old. So I didn't live through the Beatles years when they were together. So I wouldn't have remembered any of that. But my sister's 10 years older than me, so she would have been 13, 14. And she had those albums, and I just instantly made a beeline for those, ran to the record player and picked those up and played them constantly. When I was quite young. That was like my gateway drug, those two albums. And they're nicknamed the Red and the Blue albums.
Right. Red pill and the blue pill.
Yeah, exactly. It's called, because the album 1962 to 1966 has a red border around the cover, and 67 to 70 compilation has a blue border around it. You could also say it's, as people have said, now actually I was going to say the official version, but I don't think there's actually an official explanation. But this is as close as some people have got to explaining why they're red and blue, and their nicknames, the Red and Blue albums. It's been said the reason that they went for those two colors for those colors for those covers was because it's a tribute to Liverpool, from where the Beatles came from. So it's basically representing the two biggest Liverpool football teams, the two biggest football teams in Liverpool, those being Liverpool FC Football Club, who are wear red, and then you've got Everton, who wear blue. But yeah, you say the red pill and the blue pill. I was on a podcast some months back. I was invited to take part in the Sheep Farm as a guest on Sheep Farm Studios podcast with Dom and Chris, and they said to me red and blue pill as well. They suggested that, and the way they put it was, of course, what they're doing here is they're saying, well, which pill do you want? Do you want the red pill? Do you want to go down the 1962 to 1966 route? Cute, lovable mop tops era, the I want to hold your hand and she loves you and all of that? Or do you want to take the blue pill and go down 67 to 1970? Do you want to take that pill and go down the psychedelic, longer hair, rocked out kind of hippie thing? You could also say it's the red and blue lodges of Freemasonry. That's been said as well. And if you think about Freemasonry, actually, if you fast forward to, I think it was 1987 or 88, can't remember now, there was another official series of compilation albums that came out. Again, two compilation albums that came out simultaneously, and they were basically all that those compilations were tracks that were non-album tracks. So basically it was basically two compilations made up of tracks from B-sides and some A-sides, just basically tracks that weren't featured on their albums. and they were called Past Masters, Volume 1, Volume 2. Again, so we got this Freemasonic thing going on, you might say, because Past Masters, from what I understand, in Freemasonry, if you've been a worshipful master and then you stand down from that role, then you are known as a past master. I don't know. And if you look at the cover artwork on those two albums, they're black and white as well.
The black and white. Yeah. And I believe if I'm not mistaken, there's between the two albums, the Past Masters albums, Volume 1 and Volume 2, there's 33 total tracks on it, which is a big Freemason number.
Yeah.
So
said to be the highest degree in Freemasonry, but there's probably more than that. That's what they tell us within the Freemasonry world, that there's 33. It's probably more than that. And with regards to the Blue and the Red album, what Giles Martin has done is he's done the Mal thing again. He's done the AI. He's given that the AI treatment as well. If you listen to, for example, I Saw Her Standing There, the drums are really up in the mix. It's like the first thing you notice when you listen to I Saw Her Standing There, this new AI remix that Giles Martin has done on the Red album. And it actually wasn't on the original Red album. It wasn't originally on the 1962 to 66 compilation that came out in 1973. They've added it. This new remixed re-release has got extra tracks on it. But yeah, this is one of the extra tracks, and what they've done, he's turned the drums up on it. It's really loud. It's like, it's the first thing that hits you, you know, when you hear it. You think, oh wow, drums. There's lots of drums going on there. Really hear that. But he's really, when you listen to I Am the Walrus, you know, at the end of the song I Am the Walrus, you've got the radio. You've got the radio tuning, and you've got an excerpt from a radio program. What John Lennon did when he was recording the song, So the Story Goes, at the end, during the sessions when he recorded the song, what he did was he added, he wanted to put some radio tuning on the end of it, just the sound of a radio tuning up and down the dial. So what he basically did, what we're told, is he just brought in a radio set and just put it next to a microphone and just started randomly tuning the radio. And this feeds into PID so if it feeds into PID, that would mean that it's not random, that it was put there deliberately, because what he picks up on whilst he's tuning the radio is a BBC play, a BBC adaptation of King Lear. And if you listen to the words, that the section that you hear at the end of I Am the Walrus, that is the radio tuning, if you listen to the excerpt that is taken, that you hear of King Lear, it refers to death. And it has been said that the reason that John Lennon put it on there was, no, it wasn't random. It was put on there because it was another reference to Paul dying. Another clue to Paul dying in 1966. But what's happened is, if you listen to, and you can hear it clearly, but if you listen to the new remixed AI Mal version that Giles Martin has released and remixed, you can't hear it anymore. It's gone. You can hear a radio tuning, but you can't hear that section from King Lear where it says, "Slave, thou hast slain me. Villain, take my purse.
If ever thou wilt try, bury my body. And give the letters which thou find'st about me to Edmund, Earl of Gloucester. Seek him out upon the British party. Oh, untimely death. Death.
I know thee well. A serviceable villain, as duteous to the vices of thy mistress as badness would desire.
What? Is he dead?
Sit you down, father. Rest you.
So again, the cynic in me, here comes the cynic in me again, would say, did Giles Martin do that deliberately because to throw off the scent of any future generations? Because if this, the reason that they might have reissued this Blue and Red album, it's 50 years since it first came out, but maybe what they're doing here by remixing it and adding extra tracks is using it like a gateway drug again, in order to introduce it to the next lot of 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Yeah. So anyone who is 3, 4, 5 years old listening to this, or a little bit older, and hears "I Am the Walrus" for the first time, won't be aware that King Lear was on there, because it's not there anymore. So it's almost like they're brainwashing the public to think, oh no, there's you know, it's like they're playing. Yeah, it's like they're playing with Paul is Dead. It's like they're
rewriting history,
rewriting PID. Yeah.
Yep. And to me, that little King Lear part at the end, that really makes the song. Without it being in there, it's not the same. And I don't know. I think they did a real disservice by keeping that out. And especially since if the Mal technology can really isolate all those things, they could have really cleaned it up and made it even, instead of just leaving it out altogether. That's,
And I thought the whole point of this Mal software was to clean the sound, not delete and erase. Do you know what I mean? It was there basically to clean the sound up and to make it, like you say, to hear it better, not to, because if you hear it, I mean, I might be hearing it wrong, but I've listened to it about 2 or 3 times now just to make sure that I'm not hearing it wrong, because I can't quite believe it, but it's not there anymore. That King Lear, all you hear is like a radio tuning, but you don't hear King Lear anymore.
Right.
It's really, and apparently Giles Martin says, oh, we cleaned it up. That's what we did with the radio tuning. But no, you haven't cleaned it up, mate. You've actually
you deleted it.
Deleted it.
Right.
Weird, really weird.
Right. And to me, in my own conspiratorial mind, it's just instead of not introducing the PID to the future generations, to this generation, it's like a big slap in the face in a way. Like, that was one of the really big clues, right? To Paul is Dead. Yeah. And so by taking that out, it's just kind of more solidified that, that was done purposely and not randomly, like John had supposedly claimed. But that's just me.
Yeah, that's just us. We're just cynical.
Yeah.
We're just like cynical. Yeah. Okay. So moving along then, lots of books coming out, lots of books that have been released, Beatles-related, in November and October. And one of those books, which came out on December 8th, on the day that John Lennon was shot, of course, is the book about John Lennon's killing, Mind Games, The Assassination of John Lennon, which is by David Whelan. And as you know, Desiree, I interviewed him about, as we're recording this, it's December 18th. I think I recorded the interview with him about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's up online. It's on my YouTube page, Conspiro TV. It's also available on my website, The Occult Beatles. He has said to me that he wants to come back and speak, because he only spoke to me that time, but I did ask him whether he'd come back and speak to you and me and Mark together, and he says, once the book is out, and he says, yeah, that'd be great, would love to do that.
Yeah, I would love that.
So yeah, that's to come. The first I heard of this, or hopefully it's to come if he sticks to it, the first I heard about this new book, which challenges the official narrative, was in April 2023, when it appeared on a news website, which, as far as I'm aware, is the UK's most popular, most viewed news website, mainstream news website. It's the Mail Online. So I was quite shocked to see this being reported, this then upcoming book being reported in the Mail Online, on the Mail Online, because this is like super mainstream. This is right. David Whelan's like taking an alternative look away from the official narrative, and I was quite surprised to see it reported there. But this is what the report said. I've got it typed out here. A 3-year investigation. The headline reads: "Could the man jailed for John Lennon's murder be innocent? New documentary says a second gunman could have fired fatal shots and questions whether killer Mark Chapman was brainwashed by CIA. I mean, this is like a super mainstream news source bringing this out.
Right.
Main headline. Incidentally, it mentions a documentary there. If you listen to my chat with David, I did ask him about this. The book is out. It came out December 8th, but there is going to be a documentary as well. Hopefully, it'll be out in 2024. So the news report reads, and I quote, "A 3-year investigation into the murder of John Lennon has unearthed a series of extraordinary inconsistencies, including the suggestion that detectives may have fundamentally misunderstood how the shooting happened. British author and TV producer David Whelan has exhaustively examined Lennon's fatal shooting on December 8, 1980, as he and his wife Yoko Ono returned to their home in the Dakota building overlooking New York Central Park. And intriguingly, Whelan's research for a forthcoming book into the former Beatles' death has raised a series of troubling questions about how exactly the killing was carried out and why. Mr. Whelan has spoken to key figures involved in the aftermath of the shooting. These include the surgeon who treated Lennon and 2 nurses who assisted, as well as uncovering other witness testimonies which don't appear to correspond with the official narrative. The prosecution's version of events, accepted by the courts, was that disturbed loner Chapman lay in wait for Lennon and shot 5 times, 4 of the bullets hitting his victim in the back. But this now appears to be riddled with contradictions. Well, now appears? No, it's not only now it's appeared. Anyway, instead, Whelan's witnesses suggest Instead, Whelan's witnesses suggest that the way the shooting was officially recorded may have been completely wrong, with the fatal shots fired into Lennon's chest rather than in his back. The surgeon who treated Lennon and we covered a lot of this in our own podcast special, didn't we? Back in 2020, we did that 4-hour 2-parter into John Lennon's assassination. Me, you, and Mark covered a lot of this ground. The surgeon who treated Lennon and the 2 nurses who assisted are all adamant that Lennon was shot in the front with the 4 bullets grouped closely together, suggesting a high degree of marksmanship, and 3 passing straight through his body and out of his rear shoulder. Other evidence gleaned by Whelan about those who may have influenced Chapman has led him to question whether the young man might have even been groomed for the assassination through manipulation or even hypnosis by powerful backers with links to right-wing Southern Christians, the US military, or the CIA. Whelan points to the first-hand witness statements by that surgeon who worked on John in the hospital, Dr. David Halloran, and the 2 nurses, Barbara Camera and D. Sato, all of whom state unequivocally that Lennon was shot 4 times in his upper chest area from the front, with 3 of the bullets exiting from his left back. 1 remained in his left chest or lower shoulder area. Whelan also questioned Chapman's own recollection of the night's events, and quoting Whelan here, he could not coherently understand why he felt compelled to shoot John Lennon. Chapman did not remember pulling the hammer or aiming. All he could remember was a voice in his head saying, "Do it, do it." And New York Police Department Lieutenant Arthur O'Connor stated that Chapman appeared programmed on the night he shot Lennon. Chapman even now is adamant that he shot John Lennon 4 times in his back from 5 attempts, but Whelan said, and I quote, "It's something I suggest from first-hand medical testimony he could not have credibly done. Therefore, we can assume that Chapman was possibly having some kind of psychotic episode which enabled him to think he was doing something he couldn't have done. I think Mark Chapman was potentially shooting a gun or thinking he was shooting a gun, possibly blanks. He thinks he's done something he couldn't have possibly done. Therefore, the only conclusion I can come to is there might have been a second shooter, or it was highly likely there was a second shooter shooting John in a close group pattern in his upper left chest area. When I spoke to the doctors and nurses at the time who treated John and they saw his wounds many times, they all agree that whoever shot John was very close to him and standing in front 1 or 2 feet away, and they managed to achieve a very professional grouping around John's left chest area above his heart. It's almost impossible for Mark Chapman to do that from where he was, and it was dark. He was 20 to 25 feet away from John. It's a disturbing, troubling assessment. I'm well aware of that, but I can see no other explanation for John's wounds. So, yeah. I don't know your thoughts on David Whelan, his investigations, what he's come up with. I haven't yet read the book. I haven't even bought it yet. I haven't ordered it. I don't even have it yet. I don't. You've heard the interview that I did with him. I don't know what
I did hear the interview.
Yeah.
And I've been through his like his YouTube page and all of his articles and stuff, and the interview that he did and all of that. So I've seen all of that. Yeah, I mean, it's all the stuff that we've previously discussed, and other researchers have previously discussed. And I hope that it's really is coming to more of a mainstream thing, and there'll be more awareness raised around it. But yeah, I don't know the motive. Is it just he really is interested and he really wants to uncover these things, or is it something else altogether? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
I'm not giving him a full hooray at this point. But again, I also haven't read the book either. Yeah. And so I think before I form any firm opinions on that, I'll have to wait till I read the book and see what it really uncovers or doesn't.
Yeah, because my instant thought was, when I first read that in the Mail Online back in April of 2023, my first reaction was surprise, because this has never happened before. We've seen the JFK shooting get a little bit of versions of the JFK shooting that challenge the official narrative. We've seen that to a big extent being put out there in the mainstream media, but when it comes to John Lennon, I don't think it's ever happened before.
Right? No.
So that shocked me when I read that first back in April. I was surprised, and then I started to think like you. I've got a little bit suspicious. I thought one of three things could be going on here. Either A, they're going to set him up for a fall. So basically, they've got David Whelan and I put this to him in the interview when I spoke to him. I said, "Have you thought about the fact that they might have set you up to bring you down?" So that here they are pushing. Here's the UK's most popular mainstream news source, and I think that's the Mail Online, and the Mail Online is connected to the Daily Mail newspaper, which is the best-selling newspaper in Britain as we speak, as far as I'm aware. Right. So here we have this entity with its huge mainstream audience, promoting this version of history which challenges the official narrative. And I said to David, I said, have you thought about the possibility that they might be setting you up to bring you down? So they're giving you loads of support now, but sometime in the future, they're going to do something to bring you down and take down the conspiracy theory with it, your investigations with it. And he doesn't see that happening. Right. Okay, that's his opinion. I'm not there to challenge him. I'm just I see myself as a reporter, sure. Basically just giving him his platform to say what he thinks, and I just leave the listeners and the viewers who are watching and listening to it to make up their own mind. The other possibilities, of course, he's a willing instrument in this to discredit any challenges to the official narrative. And of course, the other option is he does actually care, and that he's doing this genuinely out of some kind of genuine concern, that he wants the truth, or something as close to the truth as he can get to come out. Right. Yeah. But yeah, I'll be interested to read the book. And
I know you said it on your in your blog and in an interview and whatnot, but what is his background? Isn't he a journalist of some sort?
Yeah, he started from very young. When he left school, he got a government apprenticeship scheme back in the 1980s to work at Thames Television, which is a regional TV company. It's for London. It doesn't exist anymore. It was a regional television broadcaster that provided local TV programs for London. So news, sport, local programs attached to London. But it was also a huge TV broadcaster for the whole of Britain, because it produced programs. Some of the, I can remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and Thames Television programs on the television, like hugely popular programs, dramas, sitcoms, chat shows, quiz shows, documentaries, so he was right in the hub of it. He was working in the news department, I think, researching, and then he moved into he got out of it and he went independent and started working in sport. So I think that's really where he didn't really enjoy the local news aspect of it. He said he found it quite boring, he said. But for most of the 80s, he was working at Thames TV. So that's super mainstream background initially. I think he's independent now, but and that's how he got to he managed to get this report into the Mail Online in April. As he says in the interview to me, he's got contacts, he knows people who are connected to the Mail Online, and he asked them, is it possible if you can get this in your newspaper or on your can you get them to put it in the Daily Mail newspaper or on the Mail Online? Is there any chance? And they said, yeah, let's have a look and see what we can do. And after lots of discussion and toing and froing between the two parties, between him and the Mail Online, this is what he says, and they eventually put it out there, but I was really surprised to see that.
Interested to see if anything comes of it, or if it just gets swept under the rug as usual. We'll see.
As you say, he's got a YouTube page as well, and he's got a Substack page as well. And on that Substack page, he's got a lot of the articles on there are actually taken from his book. So he told me. And there's various other articles on that Substack page which are not in his book. And he's also going to continue with that Substack page, even though the book is out. He's going to continue because he's learning new stuff all the time, apparently. So every time he learns something new, he's going to keep putting it up on that Substack page. Anyone who's interested, it's davidwhelan.substack.com, and that's Whelan, Whelan. And just to round this off with regards to this book, this is how he announced the book when it came out on his Substack page, I think. He said, as most of you know, I have been investigating John's assassination for over 3 years now. I have spoken to everyone involved with the case, and I have managed to access all the lead detectives' notebooks and files. I am relieved that all my work is now finally out there for the world to read. This book is just the start of a process for getting justice for John Lennon. Though I believe my work has uncovered most of what really happened on 8th December 1980, there is still work to do. I urge everyone who reads the book to continue looking into the case. There are still unreleased FBI, CIA, NYPD, and Manhattan DA's office files. Most released files are still heavily redacted. We must continue to seek the whole truth about the people behind John Lennon's assassination and their methods and motives. My writing will continue on Substack. There are plenty more subjects surrounding the case that need further exploring beyond my book. This is just the beginning. Okay. So,
good.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. See what happens.
Yeah.
Another book that came out this year, not around Christmas time. It was much earlier, I think in July. And again, I interviewed the author of this. Again, it's available at my site, The Occult Beatles, and also at Conspiro TV. I interviewed the author of a book which is called Dead Groovy, and it's about the life, career, and death, and some might say suspicious death, of David Jacobs, who was the lawyer in the 60s of the Beatles. He was also Brian Epstein's lawyer. He was also friends with Brian Epstein as well. Officially, it's really weird, actually, because as I said to the author when I was chatting with him, there's not that much known about him, about David Jacobs. He was known as like the lawyer of the stars, the lawyer to the stars. But if you look online, apart from some news reports about his death, there's not that much known about him. And you would have thought there would have been, because apparently he was a lawyer for Laurence Olivier, the Beatles, Brian Epstein, Judy Garland, Marlene Dietrich, Liberace. And yeah, there's very, very little online that you can find about him. From what I understand, he committed suicide. And I say from what I understand, because again, this is just based on what the scant information that I've managed to find online. He committed suicide, I think, in December 1968. So about just over a year after Brian Epstein died of a quote unquote accidental overdose. And he hung himself, apparently. So the story goes, David Jacobs, officially speaking, hung himself in a garage in his home. But there has been, and this is what the book looks into, there has been some claims that he was actually murdered. And this is something that was put forward by a friend of his goddaughter, a film actress back in the 60s by the name of Susanna Lee. And she went to the police and said, and presented her fears with regards to this. So put forward the suggestion that he was possibly murdered, because she claimed that a couple of days after she learned of his suicide, a couple of days after he died, or his reported suicide, she got a postcard through her door from Jacobs asking her to go to lunch with her that week. I think it was. So she thought to herself, well, if he was going to kill himself, why is he sending me
making
an invitation?
plans?
Yeah, making plans to meet her for lunch. So there is this suggestion that he might have been murdered. And what Dead Groovy looks at is kind of like a murder mystery kind of book. It tells you the story of his life. It explains his life story and some of the cases he was involved with and some of the people that he knew. But it also hones in on various people that he knew or dealt with as a lawyer, who could be possible suspects if he was murdered. And what they bring into it, one of the aspects that they bring into this, that the author brings into this when he goes into possible suspects, is the case that is the Beatles merchandising aspect of David Jacobs' career, and that company that was created to handle the licensing of Beatles merchandising in the early to mid 60s, which was Cell Type, which is Beatles spelt backwards. Didn't you write an article about Cell Type?
I did.
Yeah. That was a disaster, wasn't it? Cell Type. That was really, really weird. Really weird.
Very strange, and still is to this day. It hasn't really been fully explained, and a whole bunch of people made money, and that's very strange topic there for sure.
From what I understand, so I think it was around sometime in 1963 when the Beatles' fame was really skyrocketing, when we were getting so-called quote unquote Beatlemania. And what was going on was a lot of people were cashing in on this, people who weren't actually connected to the Beatles, other bodies, if you like, other people who weren't attached to the Beatles in any way, shape or form, were cashing in, making their own merchandising, T-shirts, dolls, you name it, candy bars with wrappers, with paper wrappers with the Beatles on the front. And a lot of these people were approaching Brian before going ahead with these merchandising bits of paraphernalia and asking Brian for permission, for a license to go ahead and do this, whilst others were just going ahead and doing it without asking him. So basically they were making money unofficially, but some were approaching Brian and asking him, and it got to the point where Brian just couldn't handle it anymore, because there was so much going on at that point in the Beatles world, as it were, what with their skyrocketing fame. He just didn't have the time to deal with it. So he handed it over to his lawyer, David Jacobs, to take a look at it. And what David Jacobs did essentially was hand it over to somebody else. He couldn't deal with it either. He was, I'm assuming, too busy to deal with it as well. So what he did, he got in contact with this guy called Nicky Byrne. And Nicky Byrne and about 5 or 6 or 7 other people formed this collective, and they formed a company, and they called it Cell Type, which is, as I say, Beatles spelled backwards. And this became this merchandising company that would license this Beatles merchandise from here on in. And apparently, what happened was this Nicky Byrne said to and this was going on, and Brian Epstein didn't know this was going on. Nicky Byrne said to David Jacobs, "Oh, okay, well, okay, we formed this company, Celltype. We'll do this for you, and we want 90% to 10% split of the take, with the 90% going to Nicky Byrne and his friends, not to Brian Epstein." and David Jacobs said yes.
Right.
He said yes. Yeah, okay then. All right, we'll go with that. I mean, what on earth?
Right.
What? I mean, yeah, just.
And they made a ton of money, a ton of it.
And so
yeah, I'm a Beatles collector, and I have a lot of the old original merchandise. And yeah, every time I'm like, oh, I wonder who actually got the money for this.
Nicky Byrne probably
originally sold. Yeah, it's kind of sad. But
yeah. So what happened was, after a couple of years, Brian Epstein thought, oh no, oh my God. So he tried to shut the stable door after the whole horses bolted kind of situation. He said he decided to take Celltype to court. So he got David Jacobs. I don't know if David Jacobs was involved in the court cases, but certainly Brian Epstein decided to get lawyers on the case, and they took Celltype to court to try and claw this deal back somehow and get a bigger cut of the share instead of just getting this 10%. And as a result, and I was reading the Beatles biography Shout by Philip Norman, the updated revised version. It originally came out in 1982. I'm not sure if it was in the 1982 version, but certainly in the updated version that came out decades later or some years later, there's an interview with Nicky Byrne in it, where he talks about all of this drama. And apparently, because these court cases were going on, what happened was a lot of business people got cold feet. They got nervous and pulled out of business deals. And there was a couple of deals that were about to happen with regards to Beatles merchandise, and that was with a couple of department stores. Woolworths was one of them, and the other one was Penny's. Is that a US department store?
Yep, it's now JC Penney, but yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not aware of it it doesn't exist in the UK, I don't think. Woolworths certainly did. That's gone now. That's disappeared from that's disappeared from the high streets in Britain. But yeah, apparently those two stores were going to sell Beatles merchandise across the whole of the US. And they'd gone into agreements with various suppliers who were going to supply them with the merchandise. And a lot of these suppliers, according to Nicky Byrne, invested so much money that what happened was the department stores got really nervous when these court cases were going on between Brian Epstein and Celltype. So they pulled out. They thought, no, this is, they thought that it was all going to go belly up. So they pulled out. And because they pulled out, a number of the suppliers that had invested heavily in this deal that was going to happen, and that didn't happen, went to the wall, went out of business. So Nicky Byrne puts forward, and this is, and this does tie into David Jacobs and Dead Groovy, this book, and a possible suspect for murder. As a possible suspect who could have murdered David Jacobs. Nicky Byrne in Shout claims that in 1967, just shortly after the court case had stopped, all the court cases had stopped and a settlement had been reached. So we're talking August 1967. So this is the month that Brian Epstein died of quote unquote an accidental overdose. Nicky Byrne received a phone call from an anonymous person who said to him something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, you're going to, and this anonymous person was connected in some way, shape or form to these, was one of these investors, basically. I think that's what Nicky Byrne was suggesting. He was in the book in Shout. He's suggesting that the anonymous phone call was somehow connected to one of these really angry business people who'd gone to the wall. And what the person said to Nicky Byrne on the phone was, "You're going to hear very soon that Brian Epstein is going to have an accident." And this was in August, so this is the same month that Brian Epstein died. So it's quite possible that in terms of David Jacobs, he might one of a possible suspect in his death, possible murder, could have been something connected to this bungled deal. It could be something with regards to that. I won't go too much more into it, because if anyone wants to know more, get the full details of my conversation with the author of Dead Groovy and some of the other suspects, because there are plenty others, then I suggest you go and listen to that. It's on my YouTube page, Conspiro TV. It's on my website, The Occult Beatles. But one other suspect or suspects that the author puts forward are the Cray twins. Because David Jacobs was the Cray twins' lawyer up until around 1967, when they were arrested and eventually jailed for murder. So the story goes, according to the author of this book, the Cray twins did approach David Jacobs and ask him if he would defend them over this murder trial, and he refused. So there is this suggestion that it may have been the Cray twins that had something to do with this. But so that's another book that's out that came out earlier this year, Dead Groovy. Another book that came out, and we've mentioned him already, is Mal Evans. The book is called Living the Beatles Legend: On the Road with the Fab Four, the Mal Evans story, and it's by Kenneth Womack. I've bought the book. I haven't even looked at it. I haven't read it, because apparently there's going to be a volume 2 as well, which is going to come out in 2024. Yeah, so maybe we can save that for another time and put it all together. But so I don't know if it's in volume 1 or if it's going to be left to volume 2. But I know the book was written with the input of Mal's family, his son and his widow. So they contributed to the book. So
it's not his Mal Evans' diaries, excerpts from his diaries.
I think what the author's done, and again, I haven't looked into it too much, because I really want to save this for another episode when volume 2 comes out. But from what I understand, what Kenneth Womack has done is he's researched Mal's history himself, looked into it himself. I think he might have looked at those diaries, the memoirs, because of course what was originally going to happen was Mal Evans was going to release his own book based on he was going to release his memoirs. According to him, it was going to come out in 1976, and lo and behold, he died just weeks before he was going to hand it over to the publisher. He got shot by police. Now, what I do know for sure, because as I say, I haven't read the book, what I do know for sure is that in volume 2, what Kenneth Womack says he's going to do is he's going to put every page from the memoirs that Mal Evans left, that he handed over to the publishers, all of that is going to be in the book, so you can see it for yourself. And various other bits of documentation that Mal had, because he was a bit of a collector. He had boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff, and apparently it's going to be in volume 2. So as you and I know, Mal was writing diaries all the way through his time with the Beatles, and after they split, he stayed with the Beatles after they split, and he worked for John in the solo years. He worked on projects with John. He'd helped John out. He helped Ringo and George, not so much Paul. So that's what's going to happen. That he wrote these. He had all these diaries, and he put together a book, a memoir, and he was going to hand it over to the publishers. And then, as I say, a week or whenever it was before he was going to do that, he died under, you might say, suspicious circumstances. What was
as do many around in the Beatles circle.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what happened, what was it? The official story is he was in an apartment in LA. I think it was in LA, and he was having an argument with his then girlfriend. And she called the police, or a friend came over and saw what was going on, and he called the police, and the LAPD came around, I think it was. And he had he was waving according to the story, he was waving around an air rifle in his room in the apartment, and the police shot him.
Killed him.
And killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the detectives apparently on the scene that day was Charles Higbee, who is said to have been involved in the cover-up of Robert Kennedy's shooting.
Right.
I can't find. I can actually find no proof that Charles Higbee was there that day. That's one of those rumors or claims that's been put out there, but that doesn't appear to be any proof of it.
Regardless, and the LAPD at that time was very corrupt. There was, lots of issues with the other things that were happening and big high profile crimes that they, embellished or covered up and whatnot. So LAPD, and that was the 80s, I think, wasn't it? Late 80s that Malibans died?
1976, January 76, I think it was. Yeah. And that's when that
very controversial.
So because he died, the book never came out. And the memoirs got locked away in at his publishers for decades, never came out until 2024, we're told. And it might even be in volume 1. I don't know. As I say, I haven't looked. But there is this belief amongst the alternative arena, that a lot of what was in those memoirs is not going to come out, hasn't come out.
Right.
And it was to do with secret things that the Beatles didn't want us to know about that was going on. Because, as I say, he was one of the most innermost insiders in the Beatles world. He saw everything that was going on. He was with them pretty much 24/7. He was at their beck and call. He hardly ever saw his wife and children. He was with them almost all the time during the Beatles years when they were together. So he saw just about everything that happened. And there is this claim that, what are the odds that just weeks or a week or so before he's about to release this tell-all book, if you like, he gets shot dead, and the manuscripts get locked away for decades.
Especially with the amount of people wanting to cash in on the Beatles legacy. Like you would think that something like that would be immensely popular and people would want to read that and they would make a ton of money off of it. And the fact that they chose not to is also a big red flag. That's, of course, everybody wants to know what goes on within the Beatles circle, like the gossip and the fighting and or whatever else might be in there.
Yeah.
Paul dying, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. It could. Well, the PID community has picked up on it and said that what was in those manuscripts, in the original manuscripts, this memoir that was going to come out, was something to do with Paul is dead. And that's why he got taken out. That's why Mal got taken out, so that it would never be released. But yeah, I want to wait and see the actual volume 2 and see what's in that as well, and then we can really get our teeth into it, I think, because until that happens, I'll be interested to have a look what it's
we'll lock it away in a basement for a little while and then bring it out later.
Yeah, for about 40, 50 years, just like the original ones by Mal. Yeah. Another book that came out this year, even though it's a re-release, it actually originally came out in 2018, I think it was. And again, I interviewed the author of it back in 2020, and you can hear it on my site, The Occult Beatles. It was a book called Behind the Wall of Illusion: The Religious, Occult and Esoteric World of the Beatles. This is by Sean McLeod, and it, as I say, it came out in 2018, 2017, sometime like that. But it's since been in 2023. It came out again. It's been updated and revised and reissued, if you like. And basically, it covers a lot of the bases within the occult conspiratorial world of the Beatles. I'm looking at the contents page. It basically tells the occult conspiratorial story of the Beatles from their days in Liverpool and then through the Beatles years and after the split. For example, just to give you, it's done chronologically. It's got everything. It covers most of the ground that you'd expect. It gets into Paul is Dead, the occult, the so-called occult album covers of their albums, I'll just read you some of the chapters here, the contents. Chapter 1 is In the Beginning, Birth of the Beatles. Chapter 4, Nothing is Real, Esoteric Beatles. Chapter 5, Christ, You Know It Ain't Easy, Bigger Than Jesus. Chapter 6 is about LSD and the mystic tradition. Chapter 7, Here's Another Clue for You All, album covers, films and videos. Paul is Dead in Chapter 8, Indian and Spiritual Regeneration. Chapter 9, it's got a bit about John Lennon's assassination, mind control, MK Ultra. Yeah, so it's like a compilation, if you like, a greatest hits of the occult Beatles, if you like.
Right.
And I'm just leafing through it. This book is occult and esoteric and conspiratorial, but there's a bit of sociology going on in it as well. There's a chapter, or there's quite a lot focused in about Beatlemania. You know, the popularity of the Beatles in those earlier years when this so-called Beatlemania was going on. And what Sean does is he likens that to Dionysus, the ancient Greek god. He likens Beatlemania to it being like a Dionysian rite. And I'm just leafing through the book here. I'm trying to find the passage. There's a piece in the book here where he quotes a musicologist by the name of Ruth Padell, who writes that drink, drugs, ecstatic loss of self in illusion of every kind, especially drink and madness, violent dance, crowds, theatrical spectacle, and violence. As a summary of 60s rock, Dionysus couldn't be bettered. In the 60s, popular culture made him the figurehead for male rock god. I'm just leafing the page here. So this is what Sean, when he's explaining Dionysus and likening it to the Beatles. As well as filling a void left in the socio-political environment of America during the early 60s, the Beatles also represented the changing attitude in personal affairs, in the new youth culture, and the release of sexual tensions and explorations that had been unhealthily suppressed during the post-war Anglo-American culture, and without doubt as a response to changing attitudes towards women after the war. The Beatles unleashed dormant sexual urges that manifested themselves like a Dionysian rite, in which girls seemed to behave like Maenads, the priestesses that oversaw the Dionysian rites. In Greek mythology, the Maenads, mad women or raving ones, in other words, often portrayed with supernatural associations, were inspired by Dionysus into a state of ecstatic frenzy through a combination of dancing and intoxication. Dionysus, or the god of alcohol, Bacchus, who incarnated the androgynous young male, a catalyst of wild energy, was the link between new raw sappy growth in vines or young men, crowd ecstasy, wild dance, wild nature, drink, illusion and hallucination, madness, tragic theatre and violence, maddened his worshippers, the Maenads, who tore up live animals and expressed their suddenly abnormal consciousness in hallucinating and crazy dance with the aim of removing inhibitions and social constraints, liberating the individual to return to a natural state. The act of pulling at the Beatles, pulling their clothes or pulling their own hair, which is what used to happen back in those days, doesn't it? In the Beatlemania years, the fans would pull at their clothes and try and tear their hair. The act of pulling at the Beatles, pulling their clothes or pulling their own hair seemed to suggest the activities at such rites in which the Maenads would pull apart the flesh of the resurrected Dionysus. The Beatles often barely got away with their lives when they were surrounded or pursued by hormonal teenage girls. When rock and roll had unleashed, or I should say, what rock and roll had unleashed was essentially the forces of Dionysus, and this ultimately reached its peak expression in Beatlemania, when the girls would scream wildly in their concerts, pull out their hair and rip the clothes from the band if they could have. In fact, the energies were so intoxicating that it seemed to verge on being violent, maniacal, as if, like in the Dionysian rite, the Maenads would tear Dionysus limb from limb in order for him to rise again out of his own death. And this is the bit that got me, which I thought was quite original. What Sean does is, you know, the Beatles in those Beatlemania years, when they were on stage, they used to sing "She Loves You," for example, and then they would go woo and shake their heads. What happened was, when they shake their heads, their mop top hair would bounce around, and all the girls would go absolutely crazy. That was the part where they would scream the most, when they shook their heads.
Right.
So with that in mind, this is what Sean states in his book. The trance induction central to the cult involved not only chemonosis, i.e. transformation, usually of consciousness through chemical substances or alteration of biochemical substances in the human being, but also an invocation of spirit. In the Dionysian cult, this would be through communal dancing to music, i.e. to drum and pipe, and with the bull roarer, an unusual vibrating instrument, while characteristic movements, such as the backward head flick found in all trance-inducing cults, such as in Afro-American voodoo, for example, were also part of the transforming effect. Interestingly, it was the famous head flick of the Beatles, equivalent to the Elvis pelvic thrust, that would have the girls screaming in frenzy. Yeah. I just
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. I thought that was quite original. Quite an original look on it, that is. Yeah. So that's behind.
I've often wondered the authors and stuff that are coming out more recently, if they've, perused some of our blogs and our writings, because a lot of things are brought up that have already been discussed, for years now. And it's just interesting, but that is definitely a unique take. I haven't heard that one. So that's great.
Yeah, that is. And did you know you're in this book?
What?
You're in this book.
I'm in the book?
You're in the book. You're in the reference section, in the sources. I
Really?
kid you not. I'm leafing through it now. I just remembered and I'm trying to find it. You're in good company. We've got, in the links page, you've got Corbett Report, Lennon, murdertruth.com, Beatles Bible, Robert Richard Hieronymus. Here you are. You're here. Here we go. Page 281 in the index section, just a few lines after plasticmacker.com and Henry Macau. Number 9 blog, he's referencing one of your articles, the number 9 blog.wordpress.com, 2016, 20th of the 6th. I've opened up the doors.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. So
well, there we go.
There you go. You didn't know that, did you?
I'm practically famous.
Well, hey. Yeah. So that's Behind the Wall of Illusion, the religious, occult and esoteric world of the Beatles, out again in 2023 by Sean McLeod. Also out this year. It came out at a film festival in 2022, but it actually came out on almost general release, kind of limited, but more general than just at a film festival, was the documentary by May Pang, which is called The Lost Weekend, A Love Story. Have you seen this?
I haven't seen it yet. I follow May Pang on various social media, and so I've read she's released a lot of like excerpts and stuff like that, and has talked about it and all that good stuff, but I have not actually read the whole entirety of it. Yeah.
I've seen it. It's really difficult to find and to get hold of in the UK. In America, I think it's available on Amazon. I think you can get it on DVD and Blu-ray as well, and various other streaming sites. But in the UK, it's only available as we speak now in December 2023. It's only available via a documentary website called iconfilmchannel.uk, and you have to pay £4 a month or a week or whatever it is. So I just paid the £4 for 1 week, watched it, and then unsubscribed, as you do.
Right.
You know what? I don't think if you watched it, I think you'd be entertained by it. I was entertained by it, but there's not actually anything in it that you will think that's new. She's just going over a lot of the stuff that she's already written about in books, in her previous 2 books, I think it was, and said in interviews. And I mean, we've talked a bit about it on past editions of Magical Mystery Talk. She talks about when the hypnotist thing, remember that, because of course anyone who doesn't know who May Pang is, she was John's girlfriend. Basically, it was one of those weird things where John and Yoko had split up in 1973, and Yoko, one of these weird Yoko-ist type fits of behavior. You might call it mind control, a handler, maybe it's her being a handler to John, suggested to their secretary, May Pang, that maybe she would like to, John's leaving the nest, is leaving Yoko. Maybe it's good if May went with him. Yeah, which is just what? It's just, anyway, so May does go along with John, even though in the documentary she claims that she didn't want to initially, but John charmed his way into her affections, and she went with him. And they were together for about 18 months. And she talks about the hypnotist event in the documentary, where she claims that John eventually went back to Yoko one day when he got a phone call from Yoko, and she said to him that she'd found a hypnotist who'd be able to stop him from smoking. And May says in the documentary, and as she's done in previous interviews, she was uneasy about this. She felt that there was something not quite right about this, and she said to John, "Please don't do this. Please don't go." But John went. He went to the Dakota, the apartment where Yoko was living, and he was there for the whole weekend. He didn't come home. And then when she saw him again, it was on the Monday, and they had a dentist appointment that they'd arranged for, the two of them, May and John. And she went to the dentist appointment as arranged, and she saw John there, and she says he was completely different. It wasn't the same person that had left on the Friday for the weekend. He was just like almost like a robot kind of thing. And and he left her. He went back to Yoko from that point on. So she does talk about that. Just one thing that just made me feel uneasy. How she initially got to know John and Yoko and worked for them was she actually worked, before she worked for John and Yoko, she worked for the Beatles' business manager in the late 60s, early 70s, Alan Klein. That's who she initially had worked for, and that's how she met John and Yoko. And I don't know, she says at the beginning of the documentary, I can't remember, she says that she was at school, she left school. I can't remember the exact details. I might be getting some of this one, but she says, yeah, she just wanted to leave home and go to New York and make her fortune or do something exciting with her life. So she went to New York and she wanted a job, and she thought, yeah, I want to get into the record industry or something like this. I might be getting a lot of this wrong, not quite exact, but the roundabout explanation is that she said to herself, oh, there's a job going. Oh, I know. I'll go to Apple Records and see if they've got any jobs going. So she goes into this office in New York. They ask her if she's good at typing. She says she is, but she's lying. She says in the documentary she wasn't good at typing, and she got the job. Maybe things were different back then in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. But I don't know. It just really, was it that easy? Oh, I just decide that I want to go and work at the Beatles record company, and I just walk in and they just say, yeah, of course, you can start tomorrow. How about $100,000 a year? Or do you know what I mean? It just sounds a little bit Hollywood.
Perfect.
Like a Hollywood movie kind of. I don't know.
Right. And also, unfortunately, women at that time, it wasn't quite so easy to get a job as a woman, especially a young woman. That fresh out of college or whatnot. I think she was in her early 20s, if not 19.
Yeah, I think she might have been in her late teens. Yeah.
Yeah, and just marched right in there and got a job. That does seem a bit far-fetched.
Yeah.
So, and lying about, the skills that she had, and then ended up becoming a close associate to Yoko. That's kind of weird.
Yeah. So. And lying, going for a job and lying when the boss is Alan Klein, who was a notorious figure who was very famous for sacking people, for firing people, for keeping costs down. Would he have stood for this girl being there who actually lied about her job? I don't know. I don't know. It's just a little side of me when I heard her say that in the documentary. Just made me feel a little bit not sure about this. This sounds a little bit too easy. Just walk into a record company and just get a job like that. If that was the case, everyone would have done it. Everyone would be doing it. Just sounds I don't know. I'm not sure. But so that's out this year. That documentary also out this year. It came out in October 20th, 2023. Was Danny Harrison's new album. I think it's his second solo album. He's also released material with a band called the New Number Two. They released some albums in the 2000s and 2010s, some singles as well and EPs. But he released a new album this year called Inner Standing, and I've picked some of the lyrics out from about 3 of the tracks because they do have some relevance, I think, to they're very magical mystery talkish. One of the songs is called New Religion, and he's in I won't give you all the lyrics. I've just picked out the bits that are more relevant to us. New Religion, he sings, "Scream me the news, sounds like some bullshit. Don't speak too soon, you'll go and say something stupid. Reds and the blues pretending they're different when they are all in cahoots and it's just one crooked system." And I'm thinking when he sings Reds and the blues, he's probably talking about politics, party politics, especially in the UK and Britain. You've got the right side of politics, so the blues, the Tories, the Conservatives, and on the left you've got Labour, who are the Reds.
Right.
So
that's the same here.
Yeah. So I think that's what he's probably on about there. It's just, it doesn't matter who you vote for. It's all the same kind of thing. All the same. We don't eat your food. We're sick of the water. Stop this abuse, plastic and poison. Your head's in the noose, but you're still chasing the farmer. So that's farmer as in pharmaceutical, PHARMA. Oh, please deliver me, Lord, from the megatech and the coroner. I ain't going to dance for a new religion. Don't suffer fools, my brothers and sisters. There's no time to lose. Society left us. Love is the tool. Raise the vibration, because when you live in the love, it's called a civilization. So that's one song. Another song is Right Side of History. And basically that song is just repeating pretty much the same lines over and over again. I'm on the right train. Don't take no shame. Don't cast no blame. I am love. Don't preach hate. I am love. And it's pretty much just repeating that. And then there's
like a mantra
kind of thing. It's quite modern sounding, it's quite electronica. Electronica. It's not like a band. It doesn't sound like a band album with, guitars, drums, and all of that. It's a very electronic album. Very, very contemporary sounding. And finally, just one more song, The Dancing Tree. I'll just pick out some of the lyrics from this. Welcome to the underworld. Thoughts are taken and mind controlled. Eyes are still dirty from all you saw, because you doom scrolled till your thumbs were raw, pretending all the way they saved the place while addicted to the kickback farmer pay, again, pharmaceutical, waiting for the cult to rue the day, just waiting for the cult to rue the day. Something in the way their motives stray, nothing like an island escapade, waiting for the cult to rue the day, someone better take their toys away. Justice isn't working, all the pigs they're running, you fucking nuisance. Think you're above us? You're bloody lucky. You roll with body doubles. To emancipate the sovereigns, mass formation became psychotic between the politicians, doctors, and the prophet. I know the difference. It's worth a mention. Our situation is going to need attention for the rejection of a system that's moronic to help the people that are starving for some loving. All the horrors that you've faced just for nothing. So, yeah, that's just 3 sets of lyrics there from the album. And that particular song. Yeah, any thoughts on those lyrics?
They're all kind of interesting, just depending on what side of the Beatles that you side on. But the body doubles part and the the mind control and all of that. We've had a lot of mind control discussion in this episode, it seems like, and hypnotism. And
isn't that every episode? I don't know.
Well, pretty much, but especially this one.
Yeah. And the way he's singing that particular song, it's like he's singing it to somebody personally. It's not like he's doing it like when he says you in the lyrics, it's not like the general you, like all of us. It's like he's saying it to somebody in particular. So very interesting. Maybe again I'm reaching, but it's like he's speaking to someone, and here it is in this song he's it's like he's speaking to someone, and he's talking to this someone about body doubles. So that makes it very personal, something within the Beatles world, if you like, something personal to him. I don't know. I'm just reaching, but yeah, I just thought it was weird that he put "You Roll with Body Doubles" in there, just out of nowhere. It seems that comes into the lyrics.
Right.
And this song features at the beginning of it. It's got a sample from the TV show The Prisoner, which was a popular TV show. It was released in the States. It came out in the 60s. I think it was released in the UK either in 1966 or 1967. It was a mini series. It's what you would call these days a mini series. Definitely came out in the States as well. And it's very allegorical. On the face of it, it's quite surreal. Oh, it's very surreal, actually. On the face of it, if you look at it it's like an onion. It's got different layers to it. And on the face of it, it's basically a spy thriller. It's about this man, an ex secret intelligence agent who resigns. And most of the opening titles of the show over the 17 episodes, the opening titles have this protagonist, this man who gets to be known as the prisoner. He's in London. He's an soon to be ex Secret Service agent. You see him driving to his HQ and throwing down a letter of resignation. Then he drives out of the HQ. You see him go back to his house, and the music's playing, the theme music's playing. You don't hear him talk, and he's got some luggage, and on top of the luggage, as he's loading the luggage bag with his clothes, on the top is a photograph of a tropical island. So obviously the insinuation there is that he's resigned from the Secret Service and he's going to go and escape to a sunny part of the world and get away from it all. And as he's packing, this gas comes through the door, through the keyhole of his front door. It's like sleeping gas, and it makes him sleep, makes him collapse. And he wakes up and he looks out the window, and he's somewhere completely different. He's not in London anymore. He's not in his house in London. He's in the village. And this is actually a real village. It's called Port Miriam. It's in Wales. It's a seaside coastal. It's a coastal village, and it's actually a real village. It's called Port Miriam, but in the program, it's called The Village. And everybody who lives in this village are basically prisoners. They're all Secret Service people that have been taken there because they've been found to have been traitors, if you like, working for the quote unquote other side. And throughout the whole series, the controllers of this village are trying to find out why this protagonist, who's played by the actor Patrick McGoohan, I think he directed many of the episodes as well. He wrote a lot of it, and I think he might have produced it as well, but don't hold me to that. But yeah, he's the protagonist in this. And they're trying to find out why he resigned, but he won't tell them. And he's known as Number 6. Everyone in that village isn't known by their name. They're known by numbers. And in the opening sequences, you always hear Patrick McGoohan say, "I am not a number. I am a free man." So he's basically fighting against this place where he is. And it's, as I say, it's very allegorical. It's very it seems to be anti-New World Order, anti-Big Brother, certainly, because everybody, even the village, everyone who lives in this village, when you look at the village, it's like paradise. They're all prisoners, but there's no prison bars. It's everybody, you see people going on the beach and have sunbathing, or going for a coffee, or going to the theatre, or to a dance, or just walking around in the sunshine amongst the beautiful scenery, because it's a very unique place, Port Miriam, where this village is set. It was built by an architect in the 1920s, a guy by the name of Sir Bertram Clough Williams Ellis. So it looks beautiful and everything, but in every home, there's cameras everywhere. There's CCTV cameras everywhere. And don't forget, this was made in 1966, 67, this series. So wherever you go, even in your home, there are CCTV cameras watching you, and there are microphones picking up what you're saying, and everything is being monitored. But it's a bit like real life, where people are going about their daily life, and most of the people, the vast majority of these people that are living in this village are acquiescing to this. They're almost like sheep. They're not questioning the fact that they're being watched, that they're being surveilled. There are very few people in that village who are questioning it, and one of those is number 6, Patrick McGowan, the protagonist in the story. He's constantly fighting against this system, and it's like real life. You know, you could say that we live in that kind of existence as well. We go about our daily lives. We don't have prison bars, but we're prisoners. You know, we can go to the movie theater, we can go to a cinema, we can go have a meal, go and have fun, go on the beach and have fun. But if you look beyond that outer casing and behind it, we're all basically sheep. We all take part in elections and fall for all the official narratives, and we just follow blindly. So we're all prisoners. So in that sense, I think that's what Patrick McGowan was trying to say, is that, yeah, these people live in a fantasy of this beautiful village, but they're prisoners, but without the bars. And the person that runs the village, is the manager of the village, is number 2. And every week in every episode, there's a new number 2. And this is where Danny got the name for his band, the New Number 2, from this figure, this person who, and they're voted in democratically. But again, like real life, you vote democratically for this number 2,
right?
But nothing changes. You're still a prisoner. And in each episode, we hear number 6 ask, "Who is number 1?" So again, you could say, like real life, we have a number 2. You could say the prime ministers, the presidents. But above that, there is a number 1, and we don't know who it is.
I don't know who it is.
Yeah, and he doesn't find out until the last episode who number 1 actually is. So yeah, again, you could say it's like the grand conspiracy. We've got the number 2s, the presidents, the prime ministers, but there's a tip to the pyramid, and we don't see who's on the tip of that pyramid. Now, as I say, Danny has formed a band called the New Number 2, and apparently the Beatles were huge fans of The Prisoner as well. And according to Danny, he reportedly claimed some time back that before the Beatles actually got down to filming Magical Mystery Tour in 1967, they'd actually approached Patrick McGowan about writing and directing for them a movie which would be like a prisoner type film. That's what Danny has claimed. And actually, this has been confirmed in some way by Ringo, who also said in an interview that the Beatles were fans of The Prisoner, and they actually approached McGowan. And George has said it too. He said that the Beatles did indeed invite Patrick to come and see them, with a view to him writing something for them, given that they liked The Prisoner very much. But of course, as is the case with a lot of things in the Beatles world, it never actually happened. But you do get to hear All You Need Is Love in the last episode of The Prisoner, which is quite a rarity in those days, because I might be wrong, but I seem to recall that I'm under the understanding that the Beatles, especially in the 60s, 70s and 80s and 90s, were very picky about what they allowed, about their songs being allowed to be used. They didn't like them being used in TV commercials. That's certainly not the case anymore, because they now are. But they didn't like them being used without their permission in TV programs. But they allowed All You Need Is Love to be played in that show. So it kind of shows you how big they were into it. And apparently George, in 1993, when he celebrated his 50th birthday, he celebrated it in Portmeirion, in this actual village where The Prisoner was set. And Brian Epstein used to go there. I mean, it goes back even further. Pre-Prisoner days, Brian Epstein used to go to Portmeirion on family holidays. So by family holidays, I suspect that means with his parents, and his brother. And yeah, he actually holidayed there right up until 1966, 67. That you can actually find photographs of him with George Martin in Portmeirion, and he actually had a cottage there. Yeah, he had his own cottage there as well. So, that's how regular he was. And yeah, as I say, the new number 2 was the name of Danny's band. And he was asked why he named it the new number 2. I've got a quote here from an interview. He says, "I was looking for a name for a band that was, faceless, just as a way of people being able to see the work that we were doing for what it was before they realized that there was any sort of attachment to any Beatles stigma or whatever you want to call it." And in another interview, he said, "Who wants to be number 1? You don't want to be the world's best vet, because then you don't care about the dogs anymore because you're the best. The second guy always seems to do better. And 2 is an interesting number because it's dualistic." So that's what he said about it. But, there is something that makes me feel a little bit uneasy about Danny, because when I was looking into this, I realized I was looking into his discography and everything. And apparently he composed and recorded the soundtrack for the 2019 documentary miniseries Inside Bill's Brain, Decoding Bill Gates. And I went through the pain of actually watching this in preparation for Magical Mystery Talk episode number 9. Because I was just thinking, why is Danny doing this? Maybe it's a 3-part documentary. It's 45 minutes each episode, and I thought, well, maybe it's protesting against Bill Gates. No, it's not.
No?
It's celebrating Bill Gates. It explains what a great philanthropist he is, the good he's done with the polio vaccine in the so-called third world, how he's helped bring clean water, clean sanitation to the so-called third world, how he's helped to eradicate or go some way to eradicating diarrhea in the third world, so-called third world. It talks about what a genius, hard-working man he is, how his genius brought us Microsoft, blah, 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 and on and on and on. So, yeah, it's completely celebratory. Interestingly, it came out in 2019. So this would have been right before the lockdowns.
Yeah, right before he went down.
Right before he went down, right before everybody, or lots more people, even within the mainstream, if you like, started to see, when the arms spears began to be introduced. And there's Bill at the front of the queue, as it were, talking about it. Yeah, that's when his profile began to dip a lot, I would probably say. So, yeah, so it's interesting that this documentary comes out just before all that happens. It's kind of like building up his image just before, sort of doing some kind of damage limitation, if you like.
Right.
And I do wonder, just to be fair to Danny, whether he went into this documentary thinking that Bill was this great philanthropist. And it could be that he woke up to it after the when the lockdowns came in. Maybe he did his own research, and maybe that's why in the song New Religion he's singing about pharma,
yeah,
and megatech.
Interesting.
I don't know. It's quite possible. I don't know, but with regards to Bill Gates, it was rumored this year that Bill Gates's daughter Phoebe was actually dating Paul McCartney's grandson Arthur Donald, who's Paul McCartney's. It's Mary McCartney's son, so Paul's daughter.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I haven't been able to confirm it.
Keeping the bloodlines together, huh?
Yeah, exactly. This is what it actually gets worse than that, because I looked at this and started to dig a little bit. To be fair, I first read about this on the Mail Online. Again, the Mail Online. It reported that Paul McCartney's grandson, is Arthur Donald, was dating Phoebe Gates, who's one of Bill and Melinda Gates' daughters. What the Mail Online did was it posted up a picture. I think it's from Phoebe's Instagram page. It might be a Twitter page, and it's a picture of her standing on a balcony in Paris. So it said quite close next to Arthur. They're not kissing or caressing each other or hugging each other, but they're standing closely to each other. But yeah, that's about as far as it's got, really. I mean, I've looked on her social media pages. I've looked at the actual photograph, at the text next to it, to see if she's hinting at, or stating in any way, shape or form if this is a relationship, if you know what I mean. And no, I've been actually been able to find nothing to confirm that, actually. But having said that, she is close to the McCartneys. As I say, I did a little bit of digging. Apparently, she's 21 years old. She's a student at Stanford University, and she's been described also as a quote unquote social media sensation. She's got something like over 400,000 followers on Instagram. And this is, at the time I'm recording this, I looked back a couple of weeks, and at the time I looked back, she had about 405,000 followers on Instagram and about 240,000 on TikTok. I don't know about Twitter, but yeah, I did a little bit of digging into her to find out some more. And yeah, aside from Paul McCartney's grandson, allegedly, Phoebe's actually known Paul McCartney's other daughter, Stella, for a long time. And Phoebe was actually introduced to Stella through Melinda Gates, because Melinda Gates and Stella McCartney are friends and have been for years. Yeah, I've got a quote here from October 2022. Phoebe said that Stella and Phoebe's mum are, and I'm quoting Phoebe here from the article, are actually good friends. Even when I was little, Stella would send me stuff and little notes, and I'd be so excited. I've been asking my mom forever and ever if I could meet with her. So, yeah, according to this article, Phoebe and Stella got together in the summer of 2022 in London, and they instantly hit it off, to quote Phoebe. And since then, so the article goes on, the two have remained close, mainly via texts. And also, Stella invited Phoebe along to one of the annual Paris Fashion Weeks, because, of course, Stella is a clothes designer. She's got her own fashion brand. Yeah, and according to the Mail Online, when they were honing in on her being a quote-unquote social media sensation, that's Phoebe, apparently one of the questions that one of her many followers asked Phoebe was, what's the downside? They asked Phoebe, what was the downside of being this quote-unquote social media sensation? And Phoebe replied that one of the downsides was having to put up with, and I quote, the misconceptions and conspiracy theories about my family. Yeah, it would appear, I might be wrong, as I say, I've looked a little bit into Phoebe, and it would appear that she is the next generation carrying on the Gates agenda. Because if you look at her social media pages, yeah, sure, there's a lot going on there. Yeah, you know, a 21-year-old young woman who's at university. Sure, there's lots of social media posts of her on there partying with her friends, socializing, friends, her and her friends at university, you know, regular stuff. But in amongst all of that, she's pushing quite proactively for what one who is of a cynical disposition might deem to be the Gates agenda. She talks a lot. If you look at her social media pages, video posts and other such stuff, she talks a lot, for instance, about a woman's right to have an abortion if they want to, if they so choose, especially with regards to the US, where, if I'm not mistaken, a number of US states in 2022 made abortion illegal after the Supreme Court last year overturned a legal ruling that was passed in 1973, which made abortion legal across all of the US. That's been since reversed in since then in 2022. So I'm not saying no. I don't agree. I personally don't agree with abortion or a woman's right to her own body. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that here we have a member of the Gates family who have this notorious history for quote unquote population control and family planning. Here we have a daughter of Bill Gates, of the creators of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, talking about family planning. To quote her here, she says, "I'm working on ways to support the fight for women's reproductive rights. I'm thinking about how I can use my platform and voice to support the activists fighting back to reclaim our reproductive rights, this time for good. I'm aware that my family name brings a platform, and I'm thinking about how I might use this to spotlight the awesome activists doing incredible work day in, day out." as I say, I'm not disputing her championing women's rights. It's just that, what side of the fence is she coming from this? Is she genuine? Does she genuinely care, or is she being primed up to be the next generation, of the Bill Gates agenda of population control, or as others might say, to push the eugenics agenda? I'll just point out at this stage that Phoebe at Stanford University is majoring in human biology. I don't know if that's something that's worth mentioning. And if you look on her posts, a lot of the posts where she's bringing up these issues, she tags the posts with the words Planned Parenthood. And anyone who's looked into the background of her dad, Bill Gates, will be aware of Planned Parenthood. Of course, it's a non-profit organization. Bill's father was ahead of it back in the day, and he encouraged Bill, his son, to be active in it as well. And of course, it was founded back in the 1940s by a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger, who was a supporter of eugenics, in other words, of population control. So so we have that going on. She's also active in an event called Goalkeepers, which is an event which is organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She appeared at an event in New York, I think it was this year, which is called Goalkeepers. And it was this live event where people came to talk, live speakers. According to the official website of Goalkeepers, and if I read this to you, you're going to notice you'll probably notice a lot of the key NWO words in there. In 2015, world leaders agreed to 17 global goals for sustainable development to achieve a better world by 2030. Started by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Goalkeepers is a catalyst for action toward these goals, bringing together leaders from around the world to make progress toward ending poverty and fighting inequality. Goalkeepers is dedicated to accelerating progress toward the global goals, using powerful stories, data, and partnerships to highlight progress achieved and bring together a diverse range of leaders to address the world's major challenges. In 2015, it goes on, member states of the United Nations agreed upon 17 global goals to create a more sustainable future for all these keywords. The Goalkeepers community is working toward ending extreme poverty and hunger and improving healthy living, education, gender equality, access to clean water, and sanitation. Phoebe has also appeared at a Global Citizen event. I won't go too much into that. We mentioned that, I think it was in episode 8 of Magical Mystery Talk. Julian Lennon did a Stand Up for Ukraine campaign event. He sang Imagine, his dad's song Imagine, for the Stand Up for Ukraine event that took place last year to raise money for Ukraine. And it was supported by EU President Ursula von der Leyen and all the prime ministers and presidents across the world, or most of them. And Julian Lennon sang Imagine to tie into that. So that was this campaign, Stand Up for Ukraine, that was tied into Global Citizen. So here we have Phoebe appearing at a Global Citizen live event. There's footage of her on stage talking at that. If you want to know more information about Global Citizen, you can go take a look at or take a listen to episode 8. Incidentally, Arthur, Paul McCartney's grandson, I looked online. Apparently, he's a climate investor. I didn't actually know what a climate investor was. I've got no idea what a climate investor is or was. I looked on Google just to get like a basic explanation of it. Apparently, he went to Yale University as well. Apparently he's a climate investor. And Phoebe is attached to the whole climate change agenda in other ways, aside from the Goalkeepers event that her parents organise. She's also about to launch what's called FIRE or FEAR. It's spelled PHIA. It probably is fear, knowing the way these people's brains work. It's a so-called fashion platform. It's a fashion platform between her and fellow Stanford student friend Sophia Kiani. So FIA, PHIA, it's probably an amalgamation of both their names. And Sophia is an advisor for the UN, which is a bit weird because she's a university student. A university student advising the UN? Really? Oh, God. And she's also the founder of something called Climate Cardinals, which is, according to its website, an international youth-led non-profit working to make the climate movement more accessible to those who don't speak English. We aim to educate and empower a diverse coalition of people to tackle the climate crisis. We have over 10,000 volunteers who are translating and sourcing climate information into over 100 different languages with partners like the United Nations. And apparently this FIA or FIRE, I'm going to call it FIA, has actually done something in conjunction with Stella McCartney. So this would be Phoebe and Sophia Kiani. They teamed up with Stella McCartney for a fashion brand recently. Phoebe has said of Stella, I felt very connected to her. I feel like because she's been able to use the platform she had because of who her dad is, and then she took that, and instead of being like, oh, people define me by this, she took it and she was like, okay, I have this immense privilege. Now I'm going to use it to leverage something. And what she chose to leverage is to launch a brand that is completely sustainable. Because, of course, Stella makes vegan-friendly clothes and accessories. So I think we are really deeply connected because that's a lot of what I think about. Okay, I'm my parents' daughter. That gives me immense privilege, but it's not what I'm defined by. I want to have my own identity. I want to be my own person. I want to branch away from that. But how do I do that in a way where I can yield some sort of change? Yeah.
Maybe get a minimum wage job at the local 7-Eleven or McDonald's or something. You can start there.
Yeah. Okay, climate investor. I've got it up on Google now. I've managed to type it in. My computer was in front of me, went a bit sort of slow. All right, what is a climate investor? This is according to Google. No, it's according to a website by the name of carboncollective.co. Climate investments refer to the allocation of financial resources towards projects, initiatives, and technologies that aim to mitigate the impacts of climate change. There we go again. And promote the transition to a low-carbon, sustainable economy. These investments can be made by individuals, businesses, and governments. So that's the line of work that Arthur Donald, Paul McCartney's grandson, is into, apparently, if the facts are true that I found online. So it's like they're all pushing this agenda. The McCartneys are going with this climate thing because, of course, we've got Stella as well. Earlier this year, I think Mark mentioned it in the intro. She got a royal honour earlier this year, in 2023. She got a CBE from King Charles III. In other words, what's known as the Command of the Order of the British Empire. And she was given this for, we're told, and I quote, her services to fashion and sustainability. And she'd actually been awarded an OBE in 2013, which is the Order of the British Empire. Presumably she got that for the same kind of thing, really. So she's been promoted. She's been given a higher honour. I do remember we have spoken about Stella before and her involvement with various climate change agendas because she's like championing all of that kind of thing. She's appeared at the COP, a couple of COP events, which of course stands for United Nations Climate Change Conference. She appeared at COP26, which took place in Scotland in 2021. She appeared at the G7 summit to talk about the fashion industry and how it can help with regards to so-called climate change. And she also appeared at COP28, which took place in December 2023, which took place in Abu Dhabi, I think it was. She was there as well. And we have talked about her at length in episode 6 and episode 8. I did some back checking and we talked about her at length about her involvement in the COP26 and also G7. And we also mentioned in the last episode she was invited as a guest to Buckingham Palace in November 22. She was invited by King Charles, who'd just then not that long been crowned king.
Right. That still sounds so strange to me.
It does. I keep wanting to say Prince Charles, but yeah. Yeah. We mentioned that she'd been invited to a reception at Buckingham Palace, and that was on the eve of COP27. She didn't go to COP27, but she did go to this reception. And I think we mentioned in that previous episode that also there was also attending it was John Kerry, who is apparently the US climate envoy, John Kerry. And as Mark pointed out in that episode, he's also a member of the secret society Skull and Bones. Also at that reception was the chief executive of AstraZeneca. Really nice people, and current British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as well. And it's at that reception that apparently she learned that her children, Stella's children, and Rishi Sunak's children go to the same school or something. So they got very cozy. They cozied up, talking about that. Something I didn't mention in episode 8 was when I read the reports about her going to this reception, there was very little said in the reports that I read about what they talked about. But what was inferred, but not spelled out in words, was that there was some kind of flirtation going on between Charles and Stella. Because it was really weird. They didn't, like the press, the news reports didn't say it in words, as I say. But it left the reader. It certainly left me with the impression that what they were trying to say was that Charles and Stella were kind of flirting. That there was a little bit of a thing going on, like an energy kind of thing. I don't know.
Interesting.
Because apparently when she walked into the room, apparently the protocol of what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to bow when you see the king or queen. You're supposed to bow, I think, and shake their hand. And if you're a woman, you curtsy and you lightly shake their hand or something. But what Charles did when she walked into the room is he went for her and kissed her on the cheeks. At which point she giggled and she said, and I quote, "Your Majesty, I don't know what to do anymore. I think I'm supposed to do this now." And then she curtsied and he laughed. And it was like the story was trying to, like the news reports that I've read about that, it was like they were trying to infer that, put across
going on.
Something going on or something. Really. So we've talked at length about Stella at these G7 and the previous COP that she was at COP26 in great length in episode 8 and 6. And one of the things that she talked a lot about, it was almost like a mantra when she appeared at G7. She went to the G7 summit to represent the climate change agenda from the fashion industry's point of view. And as I think I said in one of the episodes, or maybe both, well, who in the fashion industry actually put their hands up and says, we want Stella to represent us with regards to the climate change agenda. So it's not like I don't think anyone actually voted for her to go and do this. But there is this continuing mantra that she's kept saying over and over again at G7 and COP26. And she's been saying it at COP28 as well. Two things, and it's like a mantra. One of those is that she keeps saying that the fashion industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world. She keeps saying that in every interview that she's done at these events, or where she's appeared on stage at these events in front of the delegates, those there. She keeps saying this over and over again. And the other thing that she keeps saying is that she wants the fashion industry to be policed, to have laws placed on it, guidelines, policies, which if you're a business person, you might think, a business person might think, a business person might not want that because it's going to stifle their business, destroy their business. We discussed this in a previous couple of, in episode 8, maybe episode 6 as well. Now, she was at COP28. She had an exhibition there. And according to her website, and I quote, "We are hosting a groundbreaking exhibition at COP28, platforming the future of material innovation, showcasing over 15 next-generation pioneers alongside breakthroughs in regenerative agriculture, bio and plant-based alternatives to plastic, animal leather and fur, and traditional fibers. Among the innovations being platformed at COP28 are a grape-based alternative using the harvest byproduct from the Champagne Maison historic vineyard in Reims, France. We have also collaborated with Protein Evolution, which I think it's described as a US's first biological recycling company. So she's collaborated with Protein Revolution on the world's first garment crafted from biologically recycled, infinitely recycled polyester made using their BioPure technology. She's also said in an interview while she was at COP28 that she's exhibiting a leather-free alternative called Miriam, I think it's called. It's like rubber-based material, and knitwear made out of algae.
Mushrooms, right?
Yeah, mushrooms. We've talked about that in the past as well. So, on the face of it, it all sounds great. I personally don't have an issue with of course I don't. I love the planet I live on. I don't want it to be harmed and raped, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's an interview that she gave where she actually goes on to say, with regards to materials that are used, animal materials and raw materials that have been wasted to make clothes and accessories, she says people need to know that over 1 billion animals are killed every year. And the chemicals used to tan leathers can be cancerous to the people that are having to work with them. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but like I said, we've said in previous episodes, is she doing this because she genuinely cares, or does she genuinely care and she's being used by these so-called elites, or is she actually following a malevolent climate change, NWO, if you like, agenda?
Right.
And with regards to especially with where she says she wants the fashion industry to be policed, that's fine for her. She's if she wants her industry, if she goes bankrupt, for example, that's no big deal to her in a way. You could argue, because she's her dad's a billionaire pop star. So, but if you're lower down the ladder, as it were, and you rely on your fashion business, your design company, your shop, your high street shop, your store, wherever, to bring the bread and butter to the table, these restrictions, this legislation might actually ruin you, and take you out. I mean, I am aware that she has said in previous interviews, and she said it in this interview as well, that she said it in interviews at COP28, that what she's looking for is she wants legislation and restrictions put on the fashion industry, but at the same time, she doesn't want the fashion industry to be damaged. She wants there to be incentives, but she wants incentives, basically. She wants
rather than penalties.
So the thing is, there's something quite interesting that she said. She kept going on and on about. I've listened to some of the interviews and read some of the interviews that she made at COP28, and yeah, she does keep going on and on about. Again, she keeps saying the fashion industry is one of the most harmful in the world. We need to be policed. She keeps saying it on and on and on. But there was something that stuck out at me. She said she was talking to Bloomberg TV, and she was talking about her aims to have the fashion industry policed and regulated. And she said that she does this in part by infiltrating. She said, I think to infiltrate from within is kind of what I do. It's what my relationship with the fashion industry is, to show there is another way. So yeah, we're working hard at trying to make change. I'm calling out my own industry. Yeah, that's kind of like, yeah, infiltrate. That's an interesting word.
Right.
Yeah, interesting choice of words. So yeah, so here we have Stella pushing the climate change agenda. We've got Paul McCartney's grandson, a climate investor, so-called, so it's reported. And whilst all this is going on, and whilst Stella's flying the flag for climate change, meanwhile, over in Britain, away from Abu Dhabi, this year, Paul McCartney got into a bit of a spot of bother with the campaign group Fossil Free London for doing the opposite. Certainly a book I haven't read this year, and I've got no intention of reading, is a new book of photographs he's released. It's called 1964 Eyes of the Storm, and basically it's a photograph book, private photos he said he took in 1964, if you believe that is the actual same person, taking photographs, basically private photographs that Paul took back in 1964 when the Beatles were on tour, informal photographs of them chilling out on stage, talking to friends, this kind of thing. I don't know. That's the basic gist of it. I think, as I say, I've got no interest in reading it. I don't know. But to coincide with this, he had a exhibition of the photographs, of some of the photographs, at the National Portrait Gallery in London, and this was between June and October. And on one of those days, it was gatecrashed by Fossil Free London campaign group, who, according to its website, is a grassroots climate action group that aims to kick fossil fuel companies and their financiers out of the UK's capital. So that'll be London, of course. Now, the reason they gatecrashed that exhibition was because the gallery, it's reported, is sponsored by the Bank of America, who reportedly, according to one report I've read, are ranked as the fourth largest global banking investor in fossil fuels in a 2022 report, having provided $232 billion between 2016 and 2021 to fossil fuel companies and projects. However, the bank and its peers are coming under increased scrutiny and pressure to divest such interests in order to meet climate goals. Now, apparently what happens, you can find this, there's video footage of Fossil Free London going to this exhibition, gate crashing it. And I've seen it and listened to it. Basically, from what I can tell, what they did was they stood in front of one of the photographs, these protesters, and there was about 20 of them. I counted about 20 of them, and they're standing there with a large banner that reads, Bank of America funds climate chaos. And whilst they're standing there, they're singing Beatles songs, but with the lyrics changed to suit the agenda. One of the songs goes, help, the planet's burning, help, the seas are rising, help, because of oily money, help.
Oh my God.
It's like stick your finger down your throat time, really. There's another one. They just look like a bunch of old, oh, hello, Tarquin, oh, jolly holly sticks. That's the, oh, God. There was another one, it was called Planet B, and it was changed the lyrics to Let It Be. And I didn't go as far as to write down the lyrics of this. I just gave up listening to it. Something like Planet B, Planet B, Planet B, Planet B. We don't have any other planets. We've only got this one, Planet B, or something like that.
Wow.
And then they later took their protest outside of the gallery and yeah.
We've just been protesting inside this building, inside the National Portrait Gallery, because they have an exhibition of Paul McCartney's photos that is sponsored by the Bank of America. Bank of America are the fourth largest funder of fossil fuels in the world. Their money is driving climate breakdown. Frankly, we should not be allowing these institutions, these corporations that are fueling climate collapse, to be sponsoring our cultural institutions. We should not allow them to slap their logo on top of the art that we all cherish so that they can get some good PR. So shame on the National Portrait Gallery for accepting Bank of America's oily money. So let's say, oily money out.
There is no planet B, so we must make this one fossil free. Planet B, Planet B, there is no Planet B, so we must make this one fossil free.
I think what the protesters were there to do was to use Paul McCartney to highlight the fact that the National Portrait Gallery as a body, as a complete entity, is paid for in some way, shape or form by Bank of America.
Got it.
So yeah, it's a bit of a PR disaster in a way. Bit of it, yeah.
Yeah, used his popularity to get the point across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could maybe say that he should have done some. It's a bit of a hiccup for him because we've talked about this in previous episodes that he likes to wave the climate change agenda flag. Paul McCartney does.
Right.
And
his family.
It makes him look hypocritical. Maybe one might suggest he should have done his homework before he went and did this, because there he is preaching to the rest of us, the great unwashed again, that we should be taking note of climate change. And there he is, staging this event in this place where, I don't know. I mean, I remember in a past episode, we talked about when his Egypt Station, the Egypt Station album, his 2018 album, when that came out, there was a track on it which is called Despite Repeated Warnings. And I think we talked about the lyrics of that song. I mentioned it in a previous episode because apparently that is a climate change agenda song that he wrote. To quote him, this is what he said about the song. He said, "There was a president named Trump who thought that climate change was a hoax. A braggart has been in charge and seems quite unstable, to say the least. He's shouting the loudest, but he's not necessarily the smartest. And if you look at the impact someone like Greta Thunberg has had, it's inspirational. The climate crisis is rightly a huge concern amongst her generation." So he's saying all that. And then, you could, maybe some people would say he's been a bit hypocritical, but yeah. Also, this year, it was announced that Yoko's leaving the Dakota.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you turned my attention to this story. It was reported earlier in 2023.
What I heard, she has left. She moved out of it, and then there was rumors that it was for sale, but now it's not, apparently.
It's not. Yeah.
So,
apparently she moved out during the lockdowns. I've got a report here in front of me, and I'm just skimming through it. It's from the Mail Online again, because apparently the Mail Online claims that they've got the exclusive on this story that came out in February of 2023. And I'm just skimming through it, and apparently, she decided she actually moved out during the lockdowns, but she's now decided since then that that's it. She's not going to return.
Right.
So she announced that in the 50th year of having moved in there with John Lennon. They moved in 1973, and it does go on to mention her ill health. I think we mentioned it in a previous episode. It says here, she was once the toast of New York City, but has been forced to step back from public life as a result of her ill health in recent years. It's been reported that she requires round-the-clock medical care. And at an event in 2017, which she attended in a wheelchair, she remarked from the stage, "I have learned so much from having this illness." But I don't know what the illness is or was.
Yeah. I don't think it's been revealed.
No. Some people have suggested cancer, but no one actually knows for sure. Well, the people close to her will know, but we certainly don't. Right. So that got me thinking about the Dakota itself, this place that she and John lived at for all those years. And it's an interesting building, to say the least. I don't know what you know about the Dakota itself. There's certainly stories of hauntings for a start.
It's one of the most famously haunted buildings in North America. For sure.
I've got.
I just learned just the other day. I was looking up some stuff about the Dakota for this, and it has its own mortuary. Did you know that? In the basement, apparently, of the Dakota, there's a room that was built specifically because the man who built it, whose name is escaping me at the moment, or the architect.
Edward Clark.
There you go.
Yeah, it was built in the 1800s, by Edward Clark.
Right, in the 1883, I think it was commissioned, if I remember right, and built a specific room for residents who would have passed away in their apartment, could be taken down to this room and would never have to leave the Dakota until it was time for their funeral. And there's a mortuary door on the back side of the building that it goes right to only to that mortuary, only to that little space that was commissioned for that. And there's a door that leads out to the back area of the Dakota so that they can leave in privacy, and the hearse can come and pull right up next to it and take the body away.
But John was never.
I never knew that. Yeah.
No.
All of these years, I never knew that. That was very, very strange to learn.
Was John Lennon's body ever taken there at any point?
I don't know, because I don't think so, because remember the police came right after he was shot, and the police car actually took him to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I don't think he ever saw the inside of that room, but who knows? Maybe they did. All kinds of weird stuff happened that night. So
yeah, exactly. I've looked into this. I actually bought a book. It's called Life at the Dakota, New York's Most Unusual Address. It's by Stephen Birmingham. Yeah, it was built in the 1880s, and at the time it was built, New York was still a young place at the time, and it was virtually deserted. If you look at pictures from the 1800s when it was first there was actually pretty much nothing around it. It was like prairie land almost. I mean, this is like early days of the Dakota. Apparently, when John and Yoko moved in 1973, they moved into an apartment. The person that had been in it before was an actor, an Oscar-winning actor, Hollywood actor, who's called Robert Ryan. I'd never heard of him. When I read the name, I thought, Robert Ryan, who's Robert Ryan? And then I looked at a picture of him, a photograph, and oh, okay. He died in He died in July of 73, and John and Yoko moved in a little bit after that. He lived there with his wife. Yeah, I saw a picture of him. It would have been before my time, obviously. I would have been 3-4 years old when this guy passed away. So I wouldn't have known about his career personally, so when he was alive. But yeah, I looked at pictures of him and go, oh yeah, I've seen him in films before. Yeah. So apparently what they did when they moved in, knowing that Robert had been there, he might have actually died there. It's claimed he did. It's claimed,
I believe he died in that apartment. Yes,
he actually did. So that would explain then why it's claimed that John and Yoko held a seance to summon him up. Yeah.
Right away, like before all their stuff was moved in, I believe.
Oh,
they
really?
did a seance for one of the very first things they did when they bought the apartment.
And according to this book, I won't read the extract from it. I'll just sort of scan through it and say it as I see it. Basically, they held this seance and they summoned up Robert's wife, who died of cancer. Apparently she died in the Dakota as well, and she told John and Yoko after she'd summoned them up, they did this via a medium. It wasn't John and Yoko doing this. They got a medium to come in and do it for them. And apparently Robert Ryan's wife was summoned up, and she said that she wasn't going to leave the apartment. She was going to stay there, but she was cool with them getting on with their lives there and living there, and she wouldn't bother them, apparently.
Right.
And Yoko then telephoned the daughter of Robert and Jesse Ryan. Yoko telephoned the daughter and told her what her mother had said to her in the seance. And apparently the daughter said, oh, if my mother's ghost belongs anywhere, it should be with me, not with you. Yeah, that's according to this book that I read, which is called Life at the Dakota, New York's Most Unusual Address. Also in that book, there's you talk about the basement. Actually, I'll get onto that in a minute. Apparently, another story of a haunting, and again, this is from the book, the same book. Not long ago, a resident by the name of Frederick Weinstein had a most curious experience. He was walking home to the Dakota, and before crossing the street, paused to look up, as apartment dwellers often do, at the windows of his apartment, which faces both 72nd Street and Central Park. He was startled to see through the windows of his living room an enormous crystal chandelier suspended from the ceiling, ablaze with light. He checked the windows again, counted the floors. It was obviously his apartment. No other apartment occupies that particular third floor corner. And yet he knew that his apartment contained no crystal chandelier, nor had it as long as he had lived there. Of course, when he got upstairs, the crystal chandelier had gone. But there was, as there had been from the time the Weinsteins had taken the apartment, a round nipple protruding from the center of the living room ceiling, from which, once upon a time, a chandelier of some sort had clearly hung.
Wow.
Yeah, and again from the same book from Stephen Birmingham, there's a Mrs. Vesley, Elise Vesley, who lived at the Dakota, or at least I don't know if she actually lived at the Dakota. She was the lady managerette.
Right?
Yeah,
the smiling lady.
Yes, I was going to get to that. That's who John calls the smiling lady, the ghost of the crying lady. Sorry, yeah. John referred to as the crying lady, apparently. Apparently she'd undergone a deep personal tragedy, according to Stephen Birmingham's book. Her handsome young son, the apple of her eye, one day had been struck down by a truck on 72nd Street, just in front of the Dakota, and killed. She never quite got over that. She believed in psychokinesis and claimed that with the power of her mind, she could move large objects. And yeah, as you say, John Lennon saw quote unquote paranormal sightings. He saw like a phantom. He described seeing a phantom walking up and down the corridors, down the hallways, and he referred to her as the crying lady. And it's thought that it could be Elise Vesley. Yeah. And with regards to the basement, as I say, I've got another extract from that book, and this is to do with the basement and hauntings there, apparently. To quote from the book, there have been other odd happenings within the building that are harder to explain. Joe Milsiner, for example, was one man who was particularly devoted to the Dakota, and he kept scrapbooks of bits and pieces of Dakota history. He often said he suspected that there were spirits in the place. He died in 1976 outside the Dakota's door in a taxi on his way home from a visit with his doctor. How many people have died outside the Dakota? John Lennon,
Right.
Vesley's son, and this individual here. So for several weeks after his death, queer things went on in the building's cavernous basement. Tenant Wilbur Ross, a banker, was summoned suddenly to the basement by a frightened porter who reported that a heavy snow shovel, which had been hanging properly against the wall, had all at once flung itself 20 feet across the room and landed in the middle of the floor. Later, neatly stacked plastic bags of garbage that had been waiting to go out by the service door similarly flew into the center of the room and landed in the middle of the floor. Mr. Ross himself, an American representative of the House of Rothschild, insists, and a man who one would not expect to be impressed by spiritualist phenomena, insists he saw a heavy metal bar make the same uncanny journey through the air and land a short distance from his feet. When he tried to lift the bar, it was too heavy for him. During this same period, one of the 4 ancient service elevators, manually operated affairs requiring cables and pulleys, suddenly began to rise from the basement level of its own accord. It took 4 strong men wrestling at the cables to bring it down again. In time, these manifestations ceased, but it was widely assumed that they had something to do with Joe Milsiner's impatience with his new whereabouts. And I didn't know about the bodies and the mortuary. This is the basement. I'm just wondering whether this is in the same vicinity, because now we're hearing like hauntings. You know, here we have these hauntings and finding out, like you said to me about weird.
Could very well be.
Could very well be. And this Wilbur Ross, this so-called American representative of the House of Rothschild, I did a bit of digging, and apparently, from what I understand, from the late 1970s, from 1976. This Wilbur Ross spent over 2 decades working at N.M. Rothschild, an investment bank company. He was in charge of their bankruptcy, restructuring and advisory arm. He was also privatization advisor to Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York. And he served under President Trump as Secretary of Commerce between 2017 and 2021. And he's also featured, he's listed on the World Economic Forum's website as one of its so-called people. And he's attended their public events and spoken at them as well. Yeah, someone else who lived at the Dakota with a questionable, you might say, background is a guy by the name of C.D. Jackson, Charles Douglas Jackson. He was involved in psychological warfare activities for the US during World War II. He was deputy chief of the Psychological Warfare Division. And then after the war, he wrote speeches, foreign policy speeches for the government, for the US government. He was a special assistant to then President Eisenhower, US President Eisenhower, and he liaised with the CIA and the National Security Council. He was also managing director of Time Life International, which is Time and Life magazine, isn't it? And apparently he's responsible for buying the rights to the Zapruder film.
Oh, wow.
Of course, Abraham Zapruder was the guy who filmed John F. Kennedy being shot as he was in the motorcade. This businessman who had his own private home cine camera, and he just happened to take this footage. And apparently, C.D. Jackson, in his role as head honcho of Time Life International, he approached the day after the shooting. He approached Zapruder and bought the rights to the footage and suppressed it for over a decade. So
wow.
The reference being, of course, the accusation being, is that he did this deliberately in order to hide, to keep the official narrative of JFK's shooting on the right track, as it were.
Right.
Yeah. So basically that's why he bought the rights to it, was just to keep any explanation of an alternative narrative away, from coming out. Someone else who lived at the Dakota, it's reported, was none other than John Frankenheimer, who was the director of the film The Manchurian Candidate. So you got all these links again to assassination and mind control. Here we go again.
Right. And big banking families, that's Yoko too.
Oh yeah, of course, and royalty, and yeah. I put up a video about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a video linking Charles Manson to the Beatles and Roman Polanski and the film Rosemary's Baby, and all these various weird, spooky connections. Some of them very real and factual, some of them a bit occult, esoteric, and maybe not so true, but very spooky. And yeah, I put up a video about it, and there's a section when the Beatles first went to America in 1964. 2 years before that, there was the movie Manchurian Candidate. I think came out in 1962. I think it came out, and there's a scene in the film where you actually see the protagonist, the Manchurian Candidate. There's a scene in the film where he's standing by a river, I think it is, and if you look in the background, you can actually see in the background one of the buildings is the Dakota. So here we have a Manchurian Candidate standing, and behind him you can see the Dakota. Fast forward to 1964, when the Beatles went to America for the first time as part of the so-called British invasion. They did a photo shoot in New York, and I don't think George went to that photo shoot. I think he had tonsillitis, so it was just Paul, John, and Ringo, I think. And they stood, they went and they did a photo shoot for the press, an outside photo shoot. And if you look, they're standing in exactly the same spot where the Manchurian Candidate was standing at in the film. Because if you look in the background behind the Beatles, you can see the Dakota, and it's so here you have the Beatles standing just in the background, the very place where John would be shot 16 years later.
Eerie.
Yeah. And of course, I think we've spoken about it before. We've got the links to Rosemary's Baby, the film from 1968, and the Dakota, because it was the Dakota was used by Roman Polanski, the director, in 1968 as the exterior shots of what was in the film the fictional Branford apartment building. And this is where Rosemary, played by Mia Farrow, and her husband in the film moved into and became friends with this elderly couple who it turns out were Satan worshippers. And I think I might have mentioned this before, I'm not sure, but aside from that link, aside from the Dakota being used by Roman Polanski, of course, his wife was Sharon Tate. There's a scene in the film where you see a commotion going on outside the Dakota. And what's happened is somebody has fallen out of the window. A young lady has fallen out of the window. Now, we don't know if she was pushed, whether it was suicide or whether it was an accident. We don't actually learn that in the film, but all we know is that she's fallen out of this window and she's landed outside the Dakota. So again, somebody dying outside the Dakota. Okay, it's fictional, but so, and as we get closer,
she landed on a white Volkswagen Beetle.
Exactly. So the spot where John Lennon was shot, where he met his death, here we have 12 years before that happened, we have a white Volkswagen Beetle covered in blood, a Beetle in white. And if you look a year later, from 1968 to August 69, we have a Beatle in white again, because if you look at the cover of the Abbey Road album cover, you've got the Beatles walking across that crossing, zebra crossing. You've got John at the front walking in front of the other three members, and he's all in white. So we have a Beatle in white. And if you look in the background, of course, you've got the infamous white Volkswagen Beetle parked up on the curb. So again, a Beetle, a white Beetle, a white Volkswagen Beetle. And then if you look back to 68, you've got the white Volkswagen Beetle, of course, in Rosemary's Baby, covered in blood. And
the Abbey Road cover, that picture was taken, I believe it was August 8th, 1969, the same day as the Charles Manson murders.
Yeah.
That picture was taken on the same day that Sharon Tate was killed.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Really strange. And there's just so many of those weird connections. And I've looked into it in a video that I put up on my YouTube page, and I've written about it in an article as well. So yeah, really weird. Apparently, I was looking at the novel because Rosemary's Baby is based on a novel, and in the novel, I had a quick skim through it, and apparently in the novel version of Rosemary's Baby, the Dakota is actually mentioned as an option to move into. So before they move into the Branford, the fictional Branford in the novel, I think Rosemary and her husband actually discuss whether they should move into the Dakota. So I wasn't aware of that until I read about it a few weeks ago. And just to tie this up, Yoko Ono, it's claimed, has seen John Lennon's ghost in the Dakota as well. I've got a report here from the newspaper, the Sunday Mirror, from May 1983, and the headline reads, John Lennon's ghost visits Yoko Ono. John Lennon's ghost is said to be haunting the New York apartment where the ex-Beatle was murdered. Several people claim to have seen his ghostly figure wearing familiar round glasses. Friends of his wife, Yoko Ono, say that John's spirit has spoken to her. Musician Joey Harrow, who lives nearby, is convinced that he saw John's ghost at the entrance to the Dakota building at the spot where he was shot 3 years ago. And quoting him here, he says, he was surrounded by an eerie light. Amanda Moores, a writer who was with Joey at the time, says she also saw Lennon's ghost. I wanted to go up and talk to him, but something in the way he looked at me said no. Yoko, who still lives in the same block with their son Sean, claims to have seen John sitting at his white piano, and that on one occasion he said to her, "Don't be afraid, I am still with you." Yeah, and there's a couple of other reports here that I haven't been able to confirm. These are kind of like secondhand reports. Apparently there's a psychic by the name of Shawn Robbins, spelled SHAWN, and she claims that she's seen John's ghost in the building as well. But I haven't been able to really confirm that as such, because it's kind of like secondhand information. I haven't actually found her saying that herself. But well, okay, we're coming up to the end now, and I thought this might be a good spot to mention the passing of Denny Lane. Yeah,
just saw him play a live performance just a few months ago. It wasn't even that long ago. He and a couple other collaborators played the Beatles Revolver album front to back, and and it was just, it sounds strange when you hear of some die. I just saw him yesterday. It was like I just saw it. It's kind of, I had no idea that he was sick or anything, was going on. It was kind of a surprise to me to hear that he passed. But yeah, I'm sure he took lots of stories with him to the grave as well.
Oh yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, quickly, he was like the permanent member of Paul McCartney's 70s band Wings. I mean, it was formed in 1971. They kind of split very quietly in 1981, I think. But he was the constant member along with Paul and Linda McCartney, Paul's then wife, because there was a lot of band member comings and goings in that band, wasn't there? I mean, it was constantly changing lineups. A drummer would come, he'd leave, another one would come in, a guitarist would come, would leave, come in, bass player, etc., etc. But the one constant member apart from Paul and Linda was Denny, who was with them from the beginning until the end. I've got an official statement here from his wife on Denny Lane's official Facebook page. She says, "My darling husband passed away peacefully early this morning. This is on the day he passed away. She posted this. I was at his bedside, holding his hand as I played his favorite Christmas songs for him. He's been singing Christmas songs the past few weeks. And I continue to play Christmas songs while he's been in ICU on a ventilator this past week. He and I both believed he would overcome his health setbacks and return to the rehabilitation centre and eventually home. Unfortunately, his lung disease, which is, and I apologise if I pronounce this wrong, his lung disease, interstitial lung disease, ILD, is unpredictable and aggressive. Each infection weakened and damaged his lungs. He fought every day. All he wanted was to be home with me, playing his gypsy guitar. Again, just as it always is in the Beatles world, you have these what some people might deem to be coincidence, but others wouldn't. They deem it to be something more stronger than that. And you get this in the world of quote unquote celebrity. You get when celebrities die and you suspect that something amiss, something suspicious might have happened, or even when you don't, there's all these kind of weird synchronicities that are attached to that celebrity's death. Apparently there's a new repackaged re-release of the Wings album from 1973, Band on the Run, which Denny was on, of course. That's coming out next year. It's coming out in February. It's coming out on February the 2nd, 2024. Now, the re-release of this Band on the Run, which is coming out next year, was announced on December 4th, 2023. And the next day, December 5th, is when Denny Lane died. Add to that, Band on the Run, when it was originally released, was released 50 years earlier in 1973. To the day, exactly 50 years earlier, Band on the Run was released on December 5th, 1973. Yeah, so weird.
Yeah.
And you talk about secrets. Have you ever heard that interview that he did with somebody called Outlaw Renegade Nation? It's on YouTube.
About Paul is dead.
Yeah. Basically, this interviewer asks him, and you can find this online. I think the actual title of it online is Denny Lane Interview with Outlaw Renegade Nation. The whole interview is about 20 minutes or something like that, but you can find an edited version where it's just this piece about Paul is dead. And basically what this interviewer asks Denny is, and this was filmed about 4 years ago or so, what was it like playing with Billy Shepherd instead of Paul McCartney? And Denny says, who's Billy Shepherd? Billy Shears. and the interviewer says, Billy Shears Campbell. That's all you had to say, my friend. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to wrap this up. And I thought we'd wrap it up with something quite humorous. I don't know if I sent you this link. In the last episode of Magical Mystery Talk, we talked briefly about Rolling Stone magazine, the online version of it, this so-called Bible of mainstream rock music, this mainstream rock magazine. There was an article about Beatles conspiracy theories. We talked about it in the last episode, and how Rolling Stone tried to tag people who are into Beatles conspiracy theories, tried to label them as being wacko QAnon nutters, basically, freaks, basically. I think that's how we closed the last episode. And I'm going to close this episode with some more mainstream reporting on Beatles conspiracy theories. And this time it's centered around Ringo, because there was an article. I don't know if I sent you the link to this. There's an article, and it's on a website called vulture.com. And it's with Ringo. It's an article with Ringo, and they ask him a number of questions. And one of the questions was under the title Ringo Conspiracy Theories. So it's not even a question, it's just a title. And he answers, he gives his answer to the title. And this is what he said. He said, we only ever had one conspiracy that stuck. That was Paul is dead. And there were some songs people pointed out as being, quote unquote, secret. John, by accident, learned how to play a tape backwards, and we put that to full use. So we just do something silly at the end of a track, and it'd be all over the newspapers and on the radio. Hey, they're actually singing blah, 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 blah. It just made us all laugh. All of those interesting things we said were not that interesting. We had a great laugh about that, though. Look at what they're saying now. I do sometimes get the feeling that they listen to us and they know what we do. I'm not trying to blow our, trumpet.
No,
blow the trumpet or anything, but I just get the impression sometimes that they know, and they listen and they watch and they look and they read.
I honestly believe that, because if they don't personally, they have somebody who does, who just keeps up on all of the things, and just merely for security in a way, because if you have somebody who has some kind of vendetta or something against them, like they've had death threats, and they've had John Lennon actually murdered, and all of those things. And so it would be a good security investment to keep up on people who might be saying bad things or whatever. Not that we're saying bad things, but just
yeah.
If I had all the money in the world and all the people who wanted to, work for me and all that, I mean, why not keep up on it? If for nothing else, for a laugh. I'm a nobody, but I'm worried sometimes about things that I would write about. I don't want to make anybody mad or suspicious or anything like that. So yeah,
same here. To be honest,
be careful and respectful. Also, I get it.
Lock the doors, lock the windows.
Well,
yeah.
And just to go back to that new book that's coming out, if it's true that there was a second shooter shooting from the front, guess who saw all that? Who was in front of John Lennon? Yoko. She would have seen everything, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the questions I want to ask David Whelan if we do get him back for a Magical Mystery Talk interview, if you like. I would like to ask him, so where was Yoko when all this was going on?
Right. Yeah. And she claims like she didn't know where she was, or it was so chaotic that she didn't register what was happening or whatever. But I mean, come on.
And not only
you
that,
you saw something.
Yeah, exactly. I think
David thing and
I think David did actually say to me in the interview, or I've heard him say in other interviews, that Yoko Ono's never said the same thing twice or three times. Right. She keeps changing every time she's talked about that night. It's a different story. And the other thing that bothers me slightly is if she did see a second shooter, which she would have done if she was where she says she was, I would guess. Why does she keep, every time that Mark Chapman comes up for parole, why does she personally make sure that he doesn't come out on parole? Because I've read reports that she's actually personally recommended that he not be released.
Right. So, every parole hearing.
Yeah. So if she thinks he's not the shooter, why does she stop him from coming out?
Well, again, I don't want to speculate or make anybody hate me, but there could be some collaboration in there,
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't be the first person, so you're all right. You're safe in numbers because yeah.
But still, it's an odd situation, and all of the weird coincidences that go around with it as well. It's just,
And something we forgot to mention in that two-parter that we did on John's death back in 2020. I think I did mention it to you at the time, but we weren't sure what the source was. I've since discovered what the source was. I couldn't remember it at the time. I mentioned at the time that they were meant to have a bodyguard on that night. They usually had a bodyguard. John and Yoko usually had a bodyguard, and on that night he was called off. He wasn't on duty, and I couldn't remember where I heard that. And it was only after we mentioned that on Magical Mystery Talk, someone sent me an email and said, I heard you mention this, that, and the other. And apparently the person who said it was, who was that BBC radio DJ that interviewed John and Yoko? His name has completely got Andy Peebles.
Oh, okay.
It was Andy Peebles in an article, again, the Mail Online, go figure, who claims that he kept in touch with Yoko after the killing. I think he was on personal terms with her, not super personal terms, not personal, but he stayed in touch with her over the years. And I think it was him who, it was Andy Peebles who says that there was meant to have been a bodyguard that night, that day, and he was called off. Yeah.
And oddly, and I think also Fred Seaman in his book Dakota Days said something similar too, because he was also caught off. Fred Seaman was John Lennon's personal driver, and personal assistant and whatnot. And he was also called off that day.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly. So when he was supposed to be working. So all kinds of strange stuff.
And Seaman was like the Mal. He was like the Mal Evans for John.
Right. And he looked a lot like John. He was mistaken for John a couple of times out in public.
Yeah.
So
there's footage of him in interviews. I think I saw a video of him a few weeks back, a week or so back as we're recording this, where he's being interviewed by Joan Rivers, of all people, and May Pang is sitting with him. God, he really looks like John Lennon. He looks like 1980 era John Lennon,
Right.
So you could say he could pass off as a decoy at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, double. Yeah, definitely.
Yep, absolutely. And he's gotten lots of flack from Yoko. He tries to, he released that book, and she took him to court, and he's like not allowed to speak about anything at all during his employment there. And he's been told to cease and desist.
Yeah.
And Yoko does not like him very much at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll wrap this up.
Good show, number 9.
Yeah, number 9. Yeah, number 9.